Chapter 491. Is she following me? The thought popped up in Dean's mind. Although he was surprised, he didn't stop. He kept the same speed as before. He lowered his head and looked closely at Aisha, who was following behind him. He was sure that it was Aisha who had left earlier. Moreover, at this moment, the only one who had the ability to climb the giant wall was her. Why was she following him? Dean thought about it. Was she worried that he wouldn't be safe on the way back? So she came to protect him? He felt strange as he thought about it. The answer didn't seem to be the case. After all, she didn't follow him last time. If she isn't worried about my safety, then is there another purpose for following me? Dean's eyes flashed slightly, and his heart suddenly became alert. Before, he had been with her with gratitude and excitement. After all, she was the little girl he first met in his childhood. In his heart, it was like a pure dream. He didn't want to impose some dirty thoughts on this dream. But at this moment, he suddenly became alert. It was as if he had regained consciousness. He suddenly understood that childhood was still childhood. Now that 8 or 9 years had passed, the environment could easily change a person. In other words, everyone's character and thoughts were given by the environment. They were the physical embodiment of the environment. Although he didn't see much of the environment in the inner wall, but everything he saw in the city of Eden with Francis was clearly imprinted in his mind. The distorted and dirty atmosphere made him feel disgusted. Aisha had lived in the inner wall for a long time. Would she be changed by the environment in the past few years? I always think about the good side of a person I have a good impression of and don't want to hurt them. But it's just my wishful thinking. Dean thought about the countless stories he had heard in prison. Some of them were born evil, some were framed, and some were betrayed by their brothers and relatives. All of them were foolishly thinking that the other party didn't really do it. If there is a good impression, then you will cover up. That's why love is so beautiful. Dean suddenly thought of the words of a villain who had been executed in prison. His mind couldn't help but ring the alarm bell. However, what puzzled him was that he was just a nobody. If she had other motives, what could it be? Trying to get something from me? Using me? Or was he trying to frame him? He could only think of these 3 points if it was a bad purpose. But it was also because of this that he was puzzled. After all, with Aisha's strength, it was not worthwhile to frame him. Framing was a despicable method used by the weak against the strong. But Aisha could easily kill him head-on. As for what he wanted, he seemed to have nothing. If she wants to use me, I don't seem to have any use. Does she know my identity, and wants to use the 9th region of the Dark Church to help her deal with some things? Or use me to do something to the monastery? Dean's eyes lit up as he pondered. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly froze, and his eyes lit up. Is she following me to protect me or has other intentions? Let's give it a try and we will know. His eyes flickered as he maintained his previous posture, but his eyes were looking around. A moment later, he found a patch of grass. His heart filled with joy, he stopped, squatted in the grass, and stretched out his hand to pull the grass. The grass in this grassland wasn't ordinary grass, but a kind of tough weed. There was a jagged outline on the edge. Dean's fingers rubbed the weeds as he pulled out the grass. He used his nails to pinch the soft flesh of his knuckles and cut a little wound. He didn't pay attention to it as he pulled out the weeds. He weaved the weeds into 2 straw mattresses and rope. Then he put the straw mattresses into the mattresses. He put 3 layers of them on his back so that they wouldn't break during intense exercise. After that, he continued to move forward, but at a jogging pace. He stopped after running for 7 or 8 minutes. He gently gasped as he moved forward at a faster pace. He noticed that there were a lot of red figures and the smell of monster feces in the air. "Come on," Dean said in his heart. He slightly clenched his fists as his nails continued to cut the soft flesh of his knuckles to prevent the wound from healing and forming scabs. The smell of fresh blood wafted through the air. He maintained his sprinting speed. After walking for a while, he slowed down, looking as if he was tired. At the same time, Dean noticed that there was an oval red figure with a diameter of 4 or 5 meters. Although he didn't know what kind of monster it was, but he knew that its hunting level wasn't low. At this moment, the oval monster seemed to smell the fresh blood and slowly moved towards Dean. "Come on," Dean called out in his heart. Suddenly, a black figure jumped out of the grass as he walked past. It opened its bloody mouth and bit at Dean, its breath full of fishy wind. Dean was shocked. He was really shocked. He had been paying attention to the oval-shaped monster, but he hadn't noticed that there was another monster hiding nearby. This monster didn't emit heat. Its whole body was dark green, and it was integrated with the surrounding grass. Dean, who was accustomed to relying on thermal vision, was caught off guard. He was shocked on the spot. Fortunately, he reacted in less than half a second. His heart was pounding and his body was cold. He felt that his mind couldn't keep up with his reaction. He instinctively dodged backward. Bang! The black snake-like monster hit Dean's shoulder and knocked him to the ground. Dean saw it shoot again like a bow. He hurriedly dodged. At the same time, he was startled. His attention was scattered. He saw Lisa's figure was still following closely behind the giant wall. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He raised his head and looked at the giant black snake. He instantly recognized that it was a demonic gold-devouring boa, a level 33 demonic gold-devouring boa. It fed on metal, and its venom contained heavy metal elements, which could cause dizziness and paralysis in a short period of time. At this critical moment, Dean made up his mind in an instant. At the moment when it was about to bite him, his face showed panic. He raised his hand and punched it in the jaw, making its open head immediately close. He quickly backhandedly hugged its head to avoid being bitten. Even if his physique was higher than it, if he was invaded by its venom, he would be dizzy. At that time, it would be really dangerous. However, in order to confirm the test in his heart, he still took the risk. Bang! Bang! When its head was hugged, the body of the metal-devouring python twisted violently and slammed on the ground, creating a deep ditch. Chapter 492. Dean quickly clenched his fist and punched its eyes. The python was in pain. Its head shook left and right, but it still couldn't get rid of Dean. It drilled its head into the python's body, trying to push Dean away. Dean took the opportunity to let go, jumped back, turned around and ran. Although he wanted to use the crisis to test Aisha, but if he was entangled by the python, it could easily make a senior hunter faint and suffer internal bleeding. Even Sergei, who had a strong defensive ability, didn't dare to be entangled by it. Although he wasn't afraid of being entangled by it, but once entangled he would fall into a stalemate situation. So on the surface, he was like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Aisha would definitely take action. After all, no matter what her purpose was in following him, since she had invested so much in him, she wouldn't let him sacrifice himself in vain. Moreover, she would follow him because she was worried about his safety. In this way, his test would be in vain. Therefore, he had to control the situation in a crisis but not a fatal situation. After all, he was still playing the role of a senior hunter. If he fought with the python, it would be difficult to determine the outcome. There were many senior hunters who could kill the python. If Aisha's purpose was to observe him, then she would continue to lurk and wait for the most dangerous moment to make a move. But if she was really worried about his safety, then she would decisively take action when the situation wasn't so critical. Whoosh! Dean quickly turned around and ran. At the same time, his attention fell on Aisha, who was on the giant wall. He saw that her figure was climbing down the giant wall. Her hands were stuck to the surface of the giant wall. She was like a gecko. Is this her ability to climb over the wall? Dean's pupils shrank and he was shocked. He didn't expect her ability to climb the steep and smooth giant wall with her bare hand. The material of the giant wall was not simple rock, but also mixed with metal. The structure was complex, and only a few monsters that could attach to the wall could climb over it. He saw that Aisha was falling very fast. Judging from her falling speed and distance, she should have climbed over the wall the moment he encountered the metal-devouring python. Dean felt a burst of warmth in his heart. At the same time, he felt a bit ashamed of his previous speculation. Whoosh! He sped up, and the metal-devouring demon python followed closely behind, twisting its body as it chased after him. At the same time, Aisha was on the giant wall behind him at an amazing speed. Puff! When they were about 200 meters away, Dean noticed that Aisha suddenly swung her hand, and a cold light flashed across her fingertip. The cold light whizzed over and accurately hit the demonic gold-devouring python's head in a straight line. This move instantly showed her terrifying ability to predict, including the speed of the cold light and the path and speed of the demonic gold-devouring python. Everything was calculated to the extreme. Puff! The moment the cold light hit the metal-devouring demonic python's head, the metal-devouring demonic python's head suddenly fell to the ground. Blood splashed out from its head, and its huge body twisted in pain. Dean paused and looked back. He saw that Aisha had rushed over and stopped in front of the twisting python. She stretched out her slender hand and grabbed the python's tail. There was a trace of girl's vigor on her beautiful cheeks. She turned on her tiptoes, and her whole body rotated. The twisting python started to swing. Bang! After a few laps, she suddenly pulled her arm down. Bang! The python smashed into the grass with a protruding stone. The python's head was smashed into the stone. The stone was broken, and the python's head was crooked. It was badly mutilated. Obviously, it couldn't survive. Even so, the body of the python was still twitching and twisting. Aisha loosened her grip and didn't pay attention to the python anymore. She jumped and floated in front of Dean. She looked at him with concern. "Are you okay?" Dean deeply looked at her and shook his head. "I'm fine." Aisha heaved a sigh of relief and gently patted her chest. "Fortunately, I caught up. That hateful little bastard." As she spoke, she bared her canine teeth and glared fiercely at the gold-devouring demonic python that was still writhing on the ground. Dean smiled. "Fortunately you came. Otherwise it would be a bit troublesome." Aisha couldn't help but smile when she heard his words. She thought of Dean's previous embarrassing appearance and thought that it was really a little troublesome. However, she was a smart girl and would never expose the boy's deliberate lies in front of her. She smiled and said, "When you were walking, you kept your head down. What were you thinking about? Were you thinking about me?" Dean looked at her pure and crystal-clear eyes. He nodded. "Were you following me?" Aisha saw that he finally asked about this matter. She casually said, "Yes, I was halfway through when I suddenly thought that the road was too dangerous. What if you couldn't cope with a strong monster? So I secretly followed behind you." Dean nodded. There was a glimmer of light in his eyes. "When I looked back, I saw that you seemed to have climbed down from the giant wall. Is that your ability?" "Well, it's one of my abilities." Aisha smiled. Dean stared at her for a moment, then slowly retracted his eyes and whispered, "This time, you saved my life again." "I didn't." Aisha waved her hand. "Even if I didn't appear, you should have been able to get rid of it by looking at your speed. After all, this thing won't easily leave its territory. As long as you ran out of its territory, then it won't continue to chase you. But it was attacked by you and angered it. In any case, it's a trivial matter. I'm sorry. You wouldn't have come out of the giant wall if it wasn't to meet me." Dean smiled. "Anyway, thank you." "All right." Aisha smiled. "It's getting late. You go back first. I won't continue to follow you. You have to be careful and don't encounter any danger. We will meet again next time." Dudian nodded. Aisha smiled and turned around. She jumped 20 or 30 meters high and landed on the giant wall. Her hands gently clasped the giant wall as if there was a sticky force in her palms. She looked back and smiled at Dudian, then quickly climbed up to the top of the giant wall. After landing, she waved to Dudian and turned away. Chapter 493. Aisha walked hundreds of meters and turned her head to look at the bottom of the giant wall. She saw that Dean had turned around and ran forward. It seemed that he wanted to leave this bloody place as soon as possible. She sighed softly, shook her head slightly, and turned around to leave quickly. Whoosh! Dean didn't rub his wound as he moved forward. The small scratches on his fingers healed quickly. He maintained the speed of a senior hunter and pulled away from Aisha in the blink of an eye. His face was gloomy as he clenched his fingers. There was a trace of sadness and loneliness in his heart. He stopped when he reached the giant wall. He looked back to make sure that Aisha wasn't following him. He spread his wings and flew to the giant wall. After landing, he went back the way he came. A few hours later, he sneaked back to the commercial district. Dean put the god's marrow into the drawer after he returned to the 9th region. He asked Noyce to call Hawkeye. "Have you seen God's marrow before?" Hawkeye was startled as he didn't understand the meaning of Dean's words. "Elder, this subordinate was fortunate enough to see it once. It's good that you have seen it." Dean interrupted Hawkeye. He wasn't interested in the reason. He put the bottle of God's marrow on the table. "Come over and have a look." "Is it God's marrow?" Hawkeye's pupils shrank as he stepped forward and stretched out his hand. "Elder, can I pick it up and have a look?" "Feel free." Hawkeye nodded and picked up the bottle with a solemn expression. He tilted the bottle and looked at it for a moment before nodding. "Sir, this looks like God's marrow. Similar?" Dudian looked at him. Hawkeye's body tightened as he nodded. "Yes, the appearance is similar. But if you want to confirm it, then you have to take it or smell it." Dean nodded. "You smell it and find someone to inject it." Hawkeye unscrewed the cap and sniffed the bottle. His eyes lit up as he looked at Dean. "Elder, this should be God's marrow. Where did you get it? If the channel is correct, then it should be the case." Dean glanced at him. Hawkeye was startled as he saw Dean's indifferent eyes. He knew that he had made a slip of the tongue. Undoubtedly, Dean wanted to inquire about the source of God's marrow. How could Dean easily tell him the origin of such a high-level thing? "This subordinate deserves to die." Hawkeye lowered his head and said. Dudian indifferently said, "You have to think before you speak. Now go and find someone you can trust to inject it and see if it is true or false." Hawkeye sighed in relief. Then, he said with some embarrassment, "Sir, if you want to test it, we can use livestock to verify it. Moreover, I heard that when the God's blessing and God's marrow are injected into the livestock, the change will be very fast." Dean indifferently said, "How can the body structure of an animal be compared to that of a human?" Hawkeye hesitated for a moment but didn't have the courage to speak out. He turned around and left. Hawkeye knew that Dean suspected that there was a problem with this thing. If it was poison, then it would be the same as looking for someone to inject it. Even in the Dark Church, it was taboo to use Dark followers as experimental subjects. Once found out, the punishment would be extremely heavy. But it was obvious that the elders of the Dark Church could easily ignore this rule. After a moment, Hawkeye led a delicate youth into the office. He respectfully said to Dudian, "Elder, I have brought the person." The handsome youth bowed respectfully. "Subordinate Randy Talbot, codename Feather, greets Elder." Dean looked at Hawkeye and indifferently said, "Let's start." Hawkeye replied, "Yes." The handsome youth took the syringe and God's marrow from Dean. "Tower, this is God's marrow. Elder has specially given it to you. Perform well in the future." There was a trace of excitement in the handsome youth's eyes as he bowed. "Thank you, Elder. Feather swears allegiance to Elder." Dean nodded with an indifferent expression. Hawkeye inhaled the God's marrow into the syringe. He asked Feather to lift up his sleeve and inject the marrow into the blood vessels. Along with the transfer of the divine liquid, Feather's face revealed a painful expression. Cold sweat oozed out of his forehead. Not long after, His body suddenly became hot and red. His skin was as red as if he had been scalded by boiling water. He clenched his teeth and tried his best to endure it. He didn't want to embarrass himself in front of this elder and leave a bad impression. Dean stared at him. His pupils shrank and his thermal vision was brought to the extreme. He could clearly see the countless meridians in his body. They were like living worms entangled together. The god's marrow that was injected into Feather's arm had the brightest color. It was like a thick worm crawling along the blood vessels. A moment later, the bright god's serum flowed back into his heart along with the blood in his veins. As his heart beat, all the blood that flowed back instantly gushed out and spread through his veins. The god's serum also blended into his blood and was diluted before flowing to every part of his body. The heat of Feather's body gradually rose at an alarming rate as the god's marrow spread throughout his body. There was a trace of shock in Dean's eyes. Was this the god's marrow? The effects were simply too shocking. Hawkeye looked on with a smile, but there was a hint of worry in his eyes. 10 minutes passed unknowingly. The redness of Feather's skin gradually subsided. He opened his eyes and saw Dean and Hawkeye staring at him. He couldn't help but be nervous. Elder. Dean took a deep look and slowly retracted his eyes. His pupils returned to normal size. How do you feel? Upon hearing this, Feather lowered his head and looked around. His eyes were filled with excitement as he said, Lord Elder, I feel like my body is filled with energy. It's as if I have endless energy. Hawkeye knew Dean's intention. Let's see how you punch me. Feather was startled and could not help but look at Dean. Dean immediately agreed. Feather breathed a sigh of relief, got into position, and punched at Hawkeye. Hawkeye instantly pinched the fist and shook his arm to remove the power. His face showed a hint of surprise as he nodded slightly. Very good, your strength has increased a lot. Dean knew that Hawkeye was talking to him. You go back. Feather was excited. He lowered his head and said, Yes, Elder. Hawkeye looked at Dean after Feather left. Elder, this thing should be the real god's marrow. Dean looked at the remaining 2/3 of the syringe and nodded. Give it to me. You go back. Yes. Hawkeye nodded. Dean took the syringe but didn't speak. Aisha wouldn't do anything to him if she wanted to hurt him. However, he didn't know if there were any chronic toxins in it. He was worried because he knew about the existence of drugs like marijuana. Aisha wouldn't hurt him if the god's marrow contained toxins. But he would be controlled by Aisha and become a chess piece in someone else's hands. Although he couldn't guess why Aisha would need a weak chess piece like him in the outer wall. Chapter 494. Time flew by. 7 days after the second meeting between Dean and Aisha, the commercial district was full of cheers. All the residents who had moved to the inner wall moved back to their ancestral land near the Golden Wall. The property prices soared sharply. The consortiums who had seized the real estate in the area in advance were able to reap a large amount of income. The war that lasted for more than a month finally came to an end. The military had won a complete victory. The barbarians couldn't bear the losses after defending the Red Maple Mountains for a week under the bombardment of steam guns and cannons. They had to retreat to the radiation zone outside the fortress. The war wasn't over yet. The military was still chasing after the barbarians. This whirlwind of popularity completely made people forget about a certain genius mage who had occupied the headlines every day not long ago. I underestimated you for 7 days. Dean drank milk as he read the newspaper. 9 barbarians were killed and 11 were captured. Half of the heirs of the old chief have been wiped out. Yvette, it's up to your ability to stand out from the rest. He gently closed the newspaper, pondered for a moment, and then asked Hawkeye, Go and check the plan of the military to pursue the barbarians. Yes. Hawkeye felt strange in his heart. The last time Dean asked him about the plan to attack the barbarians, he felt that there was something fishy about it. Was the elder colluding with the barbarians? Hawkeye's expression remained respectful as he turned away. Heavy snow is coming. Dean gently tapped the table. The temperature was extremely low during the black snow season. He didn't know if nicotine had taken good care of the poisonous plant. He had given nicotine some other plants that had addictive toxins. The shortest growth cycle was 2 months and the longer one was half a year. There were a few poisonous plants that needed 2 or 3 years to grow. He didn't let nicotine plant those plants as the effect was too slow. The pattern of the giant wall would change after 2 or 3 years. Dean slowly got up and returned to his alchemy room. He continued to make new inventions. In the blink of an eye, it was time to meet Aisha again. Dean put on a set of light clothes and put on a dagger. He quietly sneaked out of the commercial district and arrived at the appointed place on the giant wall. This time, he didn't hunt monsters nearby. Instead, he waited quietly to conserve his energy. He also didn't want her to notice him while he was hunting monsters. It didn't take long for Aisha to arrive. She was still wearing a green dress. Her feet were wearing dark silver metal heels. She was dressed like a lady. It seemed that she was attending a banquet. In the wilderness outside the giant wall, if not for the putrid smell of blood that floated in the air from time to time, and the surrounding deep green grass, there would be a bit of an idyllic date. It was just that the previous incident had made him a little wary. At the beginning he had lured the monster to attack Aisha. Although Aisha acted in time and rushed over as soon as the monster appeared, it warmed his heart. But then he suddenly realized one thing, the smell. He had used his thermal vision to observe her, not his sense of smell. Moreover, when she had rushed over, the scent on her body had completely disappeared, proving that she had deliberately concealed her scent to follow him. It was this point that made him suspicious. If she was really worried about his safety, why would she hide her scent and secretly follow him? Was it because she didn't want him to notice? After experiencing so many things, Dean was keenly aware that it wasn't simple. Although he hadn't thought of the reason why Aisha did this, but his previous state of hot-headedness had sobered up. If he was really sensitive, then it wouldn't be too late to apologize to her after the new invention was born. But if his intuition was true, then there was a scary reason behind it. He didn't dare to relax because he had no one else to rely on. He must not fall again. I let you arrive early again. Aisha smiled as she looked at Dean. Her eyes were pure and there was no trace of impurities. The perfume on her body seemed to have changed. It was more fragrant, like the natural fragrance of green grass. Dean smelled the faint fragrance of a girl. Dean smelled the faint fragrance of the girl's body. Frankly speaking, it was very nice. He took a breath and thought of some of the habits of aristocratic ladies. Most of the aristocratic ladies would prepare several different kinds of perfume for different occasions. There were even some picky ladies who would prepare several different kinds of perfume for different banquets. Obviously, Aisha in front of him also had such a hobby. But he still remembered the last time when she covered up the scent. He deeply looked at her. It's nothing. I have plenty of time anyway. You have a good temper. Aisha smiled. Dean indifferently smiled. You are the first person to say that. Aisha chuckled. So you usually have a bad temper? Just so. Dean's eyes swept to the package in her hand. Did you bring God's marrows again? Aisha handed him the bag. Did you absorb the God's marrow last time? How was it? Was the effect good? Dean smiled as he thought about the feather that was injected with God's marrows. The effect is very good. I can see the effect on the spot. Of course. Aisha laughed. The effect of God's marrows is dozens of times better than God's blessing for senior hunters. You should be able to reach the limit of senior hunters after taking this God's marrows. Do you have rare parasitic soulworms in your hands? Chapter 495. Dragon Clans. Witcher's Fighting Technique? Dean looked at the black scroll in her hand. He didn't expect that Aisha would give him such a precious thing. There was no doubt that the value of this thing was many times higher than God's marrow. Even if you had money or connections, you might not be able to get it. It was very easy for major forces like the Dragon Tribe, the army, and the consortiums to groom an expert. They could easily use God's elixir to build them up. However, combat skills were different. They could only be learned after training day after day. This was something that others could not do for them and could not do anything to help them. The key to the strength of a top master was the fighting technique. Some veteran hunters have been fighting monsters for a long time. They have figured out some fighting techniques on the edge of life and death. They are regarded as treasures. Dean's heart was pounding. Dragon Clan has been fighting monsters for generations. They have studied countless fighting technique. But there are high and low technique. The value of this set of fighting technique is immeasurable. You gave it to me? Dean looked up at Aisha and saw her clear eyes. They were like a lake that reflected the depths of his heart. Yes. Aisha smiled and pretended to be relaxed. Dean was startled for a moment. He slowly recovered his eyes. Why did you give me such a precious thing? I haven't given you anything, and I can't give you anything. Your existence is the biggest surprise for me. Aisha bent down and looked up at his cheeks. Her sparkling eyes stared deeply at him and said. Dean looked into her eyes. After a moment of silence, he slowly moved his eyes away. Thank you. Aisha smiled, straightened up and said, You have to practice hard. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me at any time. If you can learn a few fighting techniques, you can easily kill that snake last time. Dean was startled for a moment, but suddenly understood. She had given him this technique because he was almost in danger last time when he encountered the demonic python. He took a deep breath and opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. How could he be worthy of such a great favor just by saying thank you? Suddenly, he thought of the last time she followed him. He thought that since he kept guessing, he might as well ask her directly. If there was any misunderstanding, he could solve it face to face. That way, he wouldn't have to think blindly and blame her. He was about to open his mouth when Aisha stuffed the scroll into his hand. Go back and have a look. Learn which one you think is easier. You won't have anyone to guide you, so it will be more difficult for you to learn. You don't need to waste time studying if you encounter something you don't understand. I'll teach you on the spot. Dean looked at the black scroll in his hand. After a moment of silence, he slightly nodded. This subordinate's body is very good, especially after the god's marrow that you gave me last time. This subordinate's physique has improved a lot. Now I've reached the limit of the middle order. I've already applied for the magic mark from the family. Soon, I'll become a captain of the Dark Knights and serve the Elder. Dudian nodded. How's your appetite recently? Appetite? Feather was puzzled, but he still replied respectfully, Your subordinate's appetite has always been good. I eat anything and everything. Dean indifferently said, The last time you injected God's marrow, you were at the intermediate level. This God's marrow is specifically for the powerhouses of the inner wall. Tell me in detail if there is any discomfort so as to avoid any hidden dangers. Feather was startled. After thinking for a while, he quickly replied, Reporting to Lord Elder, I don't feel any discomfort. It's just that I haven't been able to sleep at night recently. I always feel that my body is full of energy. Insomnia is a normal condition when the physical strength is rapidly improving. Dudian waved his hand. You can go. Yes. Feather respectfully replied. Dean pondered as Feather retreated. It seemed that there was no problem with God's marrow. Even if it was a chronic toxin, Feather's physique should have some reaction after such a long time. Elder. Hawkeye carefully looked at Dean. Dudian waved his hand. You can go back. Yes. Dean took out the syringe from the drawer after Hawkeye left. He looked at Noyce. There shouldn't be any problem with the god's marrow. You are about to break through to senior hunter level. Hawkeye has collected some parasitic soul worms. There are many ordinary parasitic soul worms among them. Come over and I'll give you a tube to help you reach the bottleneck as soon as possible. Yes. Noyce nodded respectfully, but there were some speculations in his heart. However, he was relieved as he thought that Dean wouldn't use him as a guinea pig since he was brought in by Dean. Dean injected the remaining half of the syringe into his hand. He took out another bottle and gave it to him. Go down and absorb it. If you feel any discomfort, tell me. Although it has been verified that there are no side effects, but nothing is 100% certain. Once you feel uncomfortable, don't resist it. Do you understand? Noyce's heart tightened. Yes. He felt that his body was heating up. He excused himself from Dean. Dean took out the black scroll after Noyce left. He slowly spread it out. There were some very fine drawings of human figures. There were various postures on the scroll. Each set of postures had a description of its meaning. Chapter 496. Dragon Stinger Fighting Technique, Single Style, Group Style, Restraint Style, Stealth Style, Assassination Style. Dean read from top to bottom. He couldn't help but be shocked in his heart. This set of Dragon Clan's hunting technique was like a complete set of hunting technique. It included all aspects. Moreover, according to the above, the Dragon Stinger fighting technique was just one of the Dragon Clan's fighting technique. It wasn't the complete version of the Dragon Clan's fighting technique. The Dragon Clan has been reproducing, modifying, and filling for 300 years. It is simply perfect. If I want to learn all of the Dragon Stinger fighting technique, it will take me 20 or 30 years to reach the point of practice makes perfect. Dean's heart was pounding. There was a feeling of blood boiling. This was a fighting technique that belonged to this primitive world. It was derived from the environment of the monsters. It was not inferior to the scientific system of the old era. It must be known that the scientific system of the old era had only gone through hundreds of years of development, but it had reached an unimaginable level of complexity. Ordinary people could barely step into the threshold of the 9 years of compulsory education. They could continue to study for a master's degree or a PhD. But they could only have some understanding in a certain field. It couldn't be said that they had a complete understanding. As for the ordinary moves, punches, and kicks, they were divided to the extreme here. For example, this Dragon Thorn chapter was specifically targeted at spear-type weapons. Although it could also be used on sabers, swords, staves, and other weapons, there would be some differences. Most importantly, this combat technique could be used against different types of monsters. There were python-type monsters that entangled, tiger-like monsters that attacked head-on, and there were monsters that ambushed and attacked. There were ways to counter and kill all of them. It's too complicated. Dean was shocked. Although he had always liked efficiency, these types of fighting techniques could be integrated into one. After all, the purpose of fighting was the same. But if he wanted to integrate them together, he would have to remove some overly detailed fighting method. However, these fighting methods were very useful. It would be a pity to remove them. He suddenly understood. The Dragon Clan had gone through 300 years of inheritance, and all of the crystallization of their fighting knowledge had been filled in, causing the Dragon Clan's devil fighting technique system to be as huge as a huge fighting empire. All the geniuses and fighters in the history of the Dragon Clan have gathered their insights here. Dean looked at the dazzling pages. He couldn't help but think that if the Dragon Clan were to give birth to an all-around genius, then perhaps they would be able to shrink the overly rich and bloated fighting system and retain the essence. In this way, it would be easier for future generations to learn it. After all, there was only one fatal move. However, it was also undeniable that during the battle before the fatal move, it required countless exchanges of blows before the fatal move could be unleashed. And this method of fighting was based on the accumulation of daily experience, as well as improvisation, systematic fighting techniques that are rich enough to cover all fields of comprehensive fighting techniques. Dean recovered. It was undeniable that many of the fighting techniques had great effect. Even in different environments, These fighting techniques would become the best fighting techniques to save one's life. But it would take too long to learn all of them. Moreover, if he wanted to master them, then even 20 years would not be enough. In the shortest time, I have to find the fighting techniques that I need the most, Dean said in his heart. Naturally, he wouldn't be like the Dragon Clan's children who would chew all of these fighting techniques into their stomach. He only needed to choose some of the fighting scenes that he would encounter in the future, and choose the corresponding fighting techniques to learn. In the future, he wouldn't be fighting with monsters, but fighting with people. Monsters would be blocked by the giant wall. Hunters would hunt monsters, but they would be controlled by people. Only by fighting with people could he stand at the top of the human race. Naturally, he would be able to drive others to fight with the monsters outside the giant wall. What was efficiency? Efficiency was to reach the peak with the shortest route. I can use my IQ to fight with monsters, but I can't fight with people. Dean's eyes flashed. Although he had set foot on the road to the peak of the giant wall, he would inevitably have to fight with countless people. But it was by no means an easy task. It was even more difficult than fighting with monsters. Monsters had long been recorded in the Monster Atlas. The information was clear at a glance. Moreover, their IQ was clumsy, so they could easily use strategies and traps to kill them. However, humans were different. Every powerhouse's magic mark ability was unknown. Their fighting skills were also unknown. Moreover, they were all humans. So, if they wanted to stand out from the crowd, they would be different from others. This was precisely the most difficult point to deal with. Dean looked at the scroll, but didn't study it immediately. Instead, he frowned and fell into deep thought. Although the most suitable weapon is the spear, but the difference between the weapons is that I only need to change a little. If I encounter a situation where I have to use a spear to deal with it, and a sword can't solve it, then I will abandon it. Changing weapons in order to practice a fighting technique is the most time-consuming thing. Single style, group style, and assassination style. In the future, I will have to challenge the major forces of the inner wall. So I will inevitably encounter situations where I have to fight against many people. I have to learn the group style and single style. The assassination style is suitable for sneak attacks against people who have stronger physique than me. He frowned. He felt that he couldn't do without any of these three. He had to learn all of them, but if he were to learn all of them, he would need at least 2 to 3 years to master them. The efficiency is too slow. I have to cut it. Dean lowered his head and frowned. After a moment, his eyes lit up. The assassination style can be delayed until later. With the help of the new invention, I only need to attack from the front. I can use the new invention as a sneak attack to make up for the assassination style. Single style can also be delayed until later. As long as I learn the group style, I can kill the enemy with the help of the new invention even if I am slightly inferior to them. As he thought of this, his eyes lit up. He had found his own path and immediately scrolled into the Dragonsting Combat Arts Group Style page. He carefully observed the postures and explanations written on it. Time flew by. He was completely immersed in it. The group style was not as simple as 1 or 2 postures. It was described in detail in theory. For example, starting from 1 against 2, the most efficient fighting method would be chosen according to the opponent's position. When it came to 1 against 3, the more efficient method would be used. The explanation was extremely detailed. 1 against 2, 1 against 3, 1 against 4. Dean slowly watched. He was not in a hurry to practice, but repeatedly watched back and forth. In the end, he even had the posture of fighting in the midst of thousands of soldiers. However, after going from shallow to deep, and repeatedly watching it, he vaguely grasped some patterns. So that's how it is. Dean gradually understood, and his face couldn't help but reveal a smile. No matter how the number of people and positions changed, and how the fighting moves changed, but the core of it always remained the same. and this core was the essence of the group style. There is no difference between a single fight and a single fight. A single fight is a fight against a person. A group fight is a fight against the heavens. Assume that the surrounding wind, the surrounding air, all enemies must be defeated. Apart from yourself, all existence must be killed. Dean was enlightened. It was as if he was studying a divine art. He suddenly understood the solution of several chemical formulas. He suddenly felt that there was no difference between fighting and science in some aspect. As long as he found the common ground and found the essence, all the formulas, postures, and external appearance were eye-catching, illusory moves. It was true that the Dragon clan had refined the fighting techniques for 300 years. These superficial moves had extremely practical effect, but they were too cumbersome and may not be used in combat. On the contrary, it was because of the hundreds of years of research that every move was excavated in detail. The ultimate result was that all the moves were the essence and couldn't be abandoned. Chapter 497. Dean rolled up the scroll and went to the alchemy room. He put the scroll aside and picked out the materials. He threw them into the furnace to smelt. His eyes narrowed as all the moves of the dragon fighting flashed through his mind. He raised his hand and grabbed the blade of the splitter. He maintained the shape of the shield and slowly danced with it. Dragon Thorn Moonlight Attack. Dean slowly rotated the sword and shield, practicing the moves one by one. If Aisha was here, she would be surprised. Dean's order of practice wasn't in accordance with the order of the Dragon Stinger fighting technique written on the scroll. He didn't practice in reverse order, but in a jumping manner. The materials were slowly smelted in the furnace, and the fire was reflected on Dean's cheeks. His dancing speed was still slow, without any ups and downs, and the moves he practiced were getting more and more chaotic. Time flew. In the radiation zone outside the fortress, after a series of battles, the barbarians had no choice but to retreat to this place where they used to live. Behind them, the military was still in hot pursuit. However, the military didn't get any advantage in the barbarians' territory even though they had the steam rifle. Unfamiliar terrain, cruel climate and constant erosion of the radiation. The military's soldiers fell in large numbers in the pursuit of the barbarians. After all, the soldiers were just reserve soldiers. Their physique was only slightly stronger than ordinary people. The military didn't have enough resources to give every soldier God's blessing. The soldiers who had God's blessing were outstanding soldiers who had made meritorious contributions in the war. Dean knew that the barbarians had returned to the sea after reading the newspaper. The military wanted to catch them all, but it was a bit greedy. Moreover, Dean knew that it was impossible for the military to annihilate the barbarians as he thought about the king of the barbarians' tent. The only way was to invite the powerhouses of the inner wall. Dean's vision had broadened as he was in the 9th region. The barbarians were a hidden danger to the outer wall. The inner wall had the ability to intervene and exterminate the barbarians, but they wouldn't do so. There were many reasons, but one of them was the most likely one. It was to control the number of barbarians. The giant wall would be overcrowded sooner or later if the barbarians wantonly bred and multiplied. But if there were frequent wars, it would effectively and naturally stop this trend. After all, in a sense, the reproduction rate of humans was not low among the creatures on Earth. Moreover, the destructive power of human itself, coupled with the amazing speed of reproduction, sooner or later, the giant wall will be filled. Dean didn't have the slightest evidence, but he didn't doubt his intuition. Throughout history he had seen some interesting and wonderful phenomena. Although there were diseases, plagues and other diseases, but the inner wall wouldn't be so empty if there was peace and reproduction speed of human reproduction. The barbarians were safe, as long as the inner wall didn't intervene. One day, all the walls in the world will be broken, Dudian said in his heart. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. He put on the scroll and quietly sneaked out of the 9th area and came to the west corner of the giant wall. Once again, he came early. However, he did not care about this. He sat down on a boulder that he had been waiting for all this while. At the same time, he closed his eyes and pondered over some parts of the dragon spike martial arts that he could not comprehend. "I'll wait for Aisha to come and ask her," Dudian said in his heart. Aisha was a pioneer, so she should have already learned the dragon technique. It was much better to have such an acquaintance to teach him than to read the scroll alone. Although he could barely understand some of it, but he didn't know much about it. After all, the size of the scroll was limited and there were many things that weren't described. Time quietly flowed. A gentle breeze caressed his face. Dean's heart was calm. He slightly opened his eyes and looked at the deep green grass in front of him. The breeze was like a green sea surging in waves. Along with the breeze, there seemed to be bursts of rancid and bloody smell. Suddenly, he felt a chill behind him. Crisis! His heart suddenly jumped. He felt a trace of a bad feeling. Suddenly, his pupils shrank, the whites of his eyes widened, and his pupils shrank. Many mottled red spots appeared in his field of vision. Most of these red spots were far away in front of him. But on the giant wall behind him and on the wilderness on the left side of the wall, there were red heat spots. All of them were in human shape. "Someone is coming." Dean was shocked. He instantly realized that the situation was not right. His intuition had always been very accurate. He quickly turned around and ran. Buzz. Suddenly, the air seemed to be buzzing. A murderous aura fell from the sky as if it was going to cut open the world. Dean's heart was aghast. He quickly looked up and suddenly saw an incredible scene. A sharp spear fell from the sky and pierced straight down. It was like a spear piercing through the earth with infinite momentum. The person holding the spear was a blonde youth. He was handsome like a demon. His eyes were also golden. His golden hair was flying in the air. He rushed straight down from the giant wall. Was he not afraid of falling to death? This thought popped up in Dean's mind. But in a flash, he knew that since the other person had done so, he naturally wouldn't have such worries. He quickly turned around and ran away. His heart was at a loss and trembling, because he saw the body heat of the blonde youth was as strong as the sun. Although it wasn't comparable to Aisha, but it was several times stronger than Francis. Dean may not be able to fight such a strong person. The most important thing was that the moment the blonde youth rushed over, the red figures behind him also caught up. There weren't many of them. There were 7 of them. But each of them had the same level of heat as Francis. All of them were senior limitless. Where did they come from? Why are they chasing me? Is it because my meeting with Aisha has been exposed? Dean's pupils shrank as he felt the murderous aura of the dragon's spear. He turned around and glanced at the badge on the shoulder of the blonde youth. The pattern on the badge made his heart suddenly stop for 2 beats. He had seen the pattern on Aisha's carriage the first time he met her. They were dragons. Dean rushed forward. The blood in his body burned like crazy. But his heart was cold. He knew that his meeting with Aisha had been exposed. No, absolutely not. Dean's eyes were red as he rushed forward. Chapter 498. Hi, Lisa? Dean was like being struck by lightning. He stared at the figure falling from the sky. Wasn't it Aisha who he had been waiting for a long time? Whoosh! Suddenly, the blonde youth who had fallen vertically from the giant wall kicked the giant wall with his feet as he approached the ground. He used the force to roll a few times before landing on the ground. His feet trampled 2 deep pits on the ground, but his figure didn't stop at all. He rushed towards Dean with his spear. A cold light flew out and pointed at Dean's back. Keep him alive. Aisha narrowed her eyes and said softly. The blonde youth's body paused. When the spear was a few centimeters away from Dean's back, it suddenly stopped. Then he flicked his wrist and raised the tip of the spear, pointing straight at the back of Dean's neck. As long as the spear advanced a little, it would take Dean's life. Dean didn't dodge. He didn't seem to see the danger behind him. He just looked at Aisha deeply and silently bowed his head. Now that things had come to this, he understood everything. The suspicions that he had previously had were completely confirmed at this moment. Aisha was standing on the giant spear. She couldn't see Dean's expression after he bowed his head, but she was surprised to see that he didn't angrily ask or reprimand her. However, it saved her a lot of trouble. She whispered, "Search for him to appear here sneakily. There must be something shameful going on. Search for him." "Yes." The blond youth responded and took back his spear. He knew that the boy from the outer wall would never be able to escape with Aisha here. He immediately stepped forward with the spear and said to Dean, "Boy, take off your clothes and cooperate with us." Dean was silent for a moment. He slowly looked up and said to Aisha, "Can you give me a reason?" Aisha slightly raised her eyebrows. "What are you talking about?" Dean stared into her eyes. "What is your purpose in using me?" "Shut up!" the golden-haired young man shouted. "What nonsense are you talking about? Do you think you're qualified to follow?" "Nothing." Aisha interrupted the blond youth and said indifferently, "Immediately search him and bring him back to the clan for interrogation." The blond youth hurriedly accepted the order and pushed Dean. He went around to Dean and glanced up and down. His eyes fell on the package in Dean's hand. In an instant, he snatched it like lightning. Dean didn't let him take it away. He just stared at Aisha without saying a word. Aisha smiled and winked at Dean when the blond youth's back was facing her. It was as playful as before. But at this moment, seeing the familiar appearance again, Dean suddenly understood the meaning behind the smile. It was a kind of banter. Whoosh, whoosh. At this time, 7 scorching figures rushed over and quickly paid their respects to Aisha. "Greetings, second princess." The blond youth opened Dean's package and suddenly saw the thing inside. He couldn't help but be startled. "This? What is this?" Hearing his slightly surprised and strange voice, Aisha looked down and suddenly froze. The package was not the fighting scroll she expected, but a string of rare green flower wreaths. The smile on his face suddenly turned gloomy. He looked up and stared at Dean. Dean also stared at her. He saw the change in her expression. His eyes flashed slightly and his fingers slightly clenched his sleeve. Aisha's eyes were full of anger. She was about to open her mouth, but the next moment she suddenly thought of something and immediately said, "Search around. The thing should be hidden by him." Dean still stared at him. There was no change in his expression. Only his slightly clenched fingers slightly trembled. The blond youth waved his hand. The 7 people who followed behind immediately scattered and searched around. "Boy, you tell me honestly, where did you hide the thing?" The blond youth grabbed Dean's collar and said angrily. Dean indifferently looked at him, as if he was looking at a worthless commodity. "I don't understand what you are talking about." "Don't play dumb." The blond youth fiercely pushed Udian's chest. "You are from the outer wall. What are you doing here? Be honest." Dean took 2 steps back. There was a trace of killing intent in his eyes. But he clenched his fist and held it back. "Outside the wall is the land of freedom. Do I need to report to you where I want to go?" "You." The golden-haired youth was so angry that he choked. He grabbed the green garland in his bag and said, "What the hell is this?" With that said, he threw it on the ground and stomped on it. Dean's eyes fell on the soil on the ground. He saw the blond youth trample it into the soil. It was instantly deformed and broken. The petals withered. He silently looked at it and didn't speak. Aisha frowned as she saw this scene. Her eyes fell on the wreath again. She was startled. The petals on the wreath were rare green flowers. This was the flower she had casually mentioned when they were chatting outside the giant wall. It was her favorite flower. "Found it!" Suddenly, a surprised voice came. Aisha and the blond youth immediately reacted. There was a bit of joy on their faces. Dean's heart sank. He didn't look back, but in his open field of vision, he saw that one of the previous 7 people had found a scroll under the stone where he had been waiting. It was the dragon fighting scroll that he had brought and hidden. The man quickly came over with the scroll and handed it to the blonde youth. The blonde youth looked at it and his face slightly changed. He said to Aisha, "Second princess, this is our dragon clan's dragon thorn." Aisha's face turned cold. "Take him back and carefully investigate." "Yes." The blonde youth took the order and said in a cold voice, "Boy, you'd better behave." Dean was silent and let the blonde youth grab him. He had no room to resist. He couldn't escape in front of Aisha and the blonde youth. Not to mention there were 7 senior frontiersmen behind them. "Let's go." Aisha jumped off the giant spear and pulled it out of the soil with one hand. She stepped on the giant wall and quickly went up. The blonde youth and the 7 senior frontiersmen didn't climb the wall. They took Dean back to the bottom of the giant wall. Aisha walked on the edge of the giant wall, paying attention to Dean and the others below. There was a trace of coldness in her eyes. From the moment they appeared to the moment they grabbed Dean, Dean was able to react and hide the fighting scroll that she gave him. This kind of reaction could only mean one thing. Dean was already on guard against her. However, when she saw the green wreath, she felt that it should not be a matter of vigilance. There was another more terrible possibility. That was, in that instant, Dean realized that the only thing that could bring him danger was the fighting scroll and nothing else. And this conclusion came from the combination of many thoughts that appeared in an instant. She had never noticed such a keen sense of crisis in this boy before. Chapter 499. Whoosh, whoosh. A figure passed through the jungle. Occasionally they would jump over the boulders or the skeletons of the monsters that had fallen on the side of the giant wall. Aisha was like a shadow on top of the giant wall. Her hand was holding a huge spear that didn't match her figure. Aisha suddenly sensed something halfway. She turned her head and looked at the front. She faintly saw a figure flashing by. Her eyes narrowed as the corners of her mouth curved into a smile. The scenery was flying by. Dean silently followed her. The chaos in his heart gradually calmed down. He understood that the days he spent with Aisha were all lies and traps. She had given him the god's marrows and the dragon battle scroll. Her purpose was to pave the way for this moment. Her purpose shouldn't be to kill me. Dean's eyes were deep. There was no need for Aisha to go through so much trouble. There were probably 2 reasons. First, she had investigated his identity and knew that he was from the monastery. So she used him to deal with the monastery. Someone from the monastery stole the Dragon Clan's combat scroll. This was a very good excuse to attack. The second purpose was to imprison him and use his talent in divine arts to create value for the Dragon Clan. That's good. Dean's mouth twitched. Everything is cleared now. The blonde youth turned to look at Dean and shouted, "What are you muttering about? Hurry up and keep up." Then he sped up again. Dean indifferently looked at him. He didn't pay attention to the youth's speed. He still maintained his speed, which was slightly higher than that of a senior hunter. Although he was escaping, he still maintained the speed of a primary limitless. He didn't use his full firepower. After all, even if he could escape at that time, those people, who could easily climb over the giant wall, would chase him back to their lair. He had to keep his cards in hand in order to have a chance to make a comeback. 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. They didn't stop to rest until they arrived at a spacious clearing with sparse weeds. Only then did they slow down. Dudian noticed that there was an entrance similar to the giant wall passage in the outer wall not far from them. Whoosh! The blonde youth took the lead and lifted the entrance. The rest of the 7 people surrounded Dean and entered the passage. The structure of the passage was almost the same as the one in the outer wall. There were murals of the goddess on both sides of the passage. The goddess smiled at the people passing by. In the blink of an eye they came to the entrance of the giant wall. Dean looked up and saw that there were 8 mounts that looked like cows and lizard. There were saddles on their backs, steel protective gear on their knees and heads, and a thick lizard tail behind them. His eyes flashed. He had seen these mounts in the monster atlas before. They were called earthen rock dragons. The reason why they were named with the word dragon was that their appearance was similar to the legendary dragon. It was also said that the earthen rock dragons had 1,000th of the dragon's bloodline. Whatever the case, few would confuse the earthen rock dragon with the legendary dragon among magical beasts. After all, the earthen rock dragon's hunting level ranged from 18 to 25, and it was a rare herbivorous magical beast. "Let's go!" the blond youth shouted at Dean. Dean followed him onto the back of a rock dragon. When his left hand touched the back of the rock dragon that was originally tied to the iron pole on the ground suddenly screamed, its hooves scampering in a commotion. Dean saw this and quickly raised his left hand. At the same time, the blond youth snorted and sat behind Dean. He raised his hand and pressed down. The earth dragon's panic suddenly calmed down and it bowed its head docile. "Second princess, we'll go back first," the blond youth said to Haisha on the giant wall. Haisha stood on the edge of the giant wall. Looking from afar, the giant spear in her hand was more eye-catching. She nodded slightly and didn't say anything. Her eyes seemed to pause on Dean, and then she turned her head. The blond youth immediately pulled the reins and drove the earth dragon and the other 7 people away. Dean sat on the back of the earth rock dragon in silence. It was useless to escape now. He could only wait. There was still a glimmer of hope for him, even if the dragon clan wanted him to make a special invention for them. Whoosh! The 8 earth dragon flew all the way. Their speed was extremely fast, and the ground rumbled. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the fortress in the central area. The soldiers stationed in the fortress saw the 8 earth dragon from afar. They pulled up the gate of the fortress from a few miles away so that everyone could pass through without slowing down. After entering the fortress, the earth dragon flew along the road in the suburban area. Half an hour later, everyone entered a lush green mountain range. The blond youth drove the earth dragon and climbed straight up the steep mountain step. It didn't take long for them to reach the top of the mountain. It was a huge square. At the end of the square, there was a high-rise building similar to the Vatican. The top of the building was pointed and could be a good lightning conductor. Seeing this, he couldn't help but move his eyes. It seemed that the principle of lightning rods had long been used in the inner wall. Most of the aristocratic buildings in the outer wall were flat buildings. Occasionally there were a few steeples. They looked like the old medieval buildings, but there were some differences. It looked like they were imitating the buildings in the inner wall, but the imitation was not complete. "You look after him. I'll go and report," the blond youth said coldly. 7 people responded and surrounded Dean. The blond youth went up the stairs to the high-rise building in front of the square. His figure disappeared into the door of the building. The light couldn't shine inside. After a moment, the blond youth returned and said to Dean in a cold voice, "Come with me." Dean followed. They went down the stairs to the high-rise building. The floor was covered with soft carpet. The hall was extremely spacious. There were several chairs lined up on both sides of the hall. The air was filled with the fragrance of petals. At the moment, there were 3 figures standing in the hall. All of them were over 50 years old. There were some white hair on their temples. They were wearing long gowns. The style of their clothes was a bit similar to the ancient Eastern dress. However, there were some suit elements added to it. It wasn't simple but had a unique modern style. "Where is the thing?" The old woman in the middle was holding a wooden stick as she coldly looked down at Dean. The blond youth who was standing in front of Dean quickly came forward and handed over the scroll. "Elder, this is the lost dragon thorn." Chapter 500. Dean had been looking down since he entered the hall. He noticed the expression of the old woman when she took the scroll. It seemed that she had seen some clues from the scroll. He was about to open his mouth to identify Aisha when he heard her question. Suddenly, his heart moved. Aisha's mind was meticulous. She should have expected this interrogation. Didn't she prevent his confession? The answer was obvious. Aisha should have expected such a scene. But the situation was still the same. In other words, his confession might not be effective. Aisha should have arranged something else. So much so that he would confess to her out of anger, and it would become a part of her plan. He tried to put himself in Aisha's shoes. If he was in her shoes, he would certainly be on guard and even use it. Humph! The old woman snorted as she saw Dean didn't answer. She narrowed her tree-like eyes and stared at Dean coldly. Even if you don't say it, I know that Aisha gave it to you, right? Dean was stunned. She knows? The old woman and the two old men's faces sank as they saw Dean's reaction. They knew that their guess was not wrong. Take him away and lock him up, the old woman said in a cold voice. Don't make this matter public for the time being. Don't let outsiders know. The blond youth bowed respectfully. Yes. He turned to Dean and said, Let's go. Dean didn't resist and followed behind him. But his heart was full of doubts. Did these three people know that Aisha was colluding with him? What was Aisha's purpose? Or did he overestimate her? Did she leave a flaw in the scroll that exposed her plan? The old woman slowly clenched the wooden stick as she watched Dean's back disappear from the hall. Her face was gloomy. Aisha is really messing around this time. She even stole the Dragon Clan's secret fighting technique and passed it to outsiders. This has touched the taboo of the clan. We can't tolerate it anymore. Yes. An old man with a handlebar mustache on her right snorted coldly and said, She's so mischievous because she's been spoiled in the past. This time, she's really gone too far. She doesn't know when to hold back. She must be severely punished. If it was any other clan member who did such a thing, they would have been thrown into the dragon prison. How can we explain to the clan if we don't punish her? Where is the dignity of the clan rules? Another blond old man frowned. Although Li Sha has occasionally made mistakes over the years, but her help to the clan is obvious to all. Moreover, she is a sensible child. There should be another reason for her secret fighting skills. In any case, we must investigate this matter. First, we must find out the origin of the little devil from the outer wall. Let's see how he bewitched Li Sha and how he bewitched her. The old woman's eyes were cold as she nodded. Yes. Let's investigate first and then hold him accountable. Immediately send someone to find out the identity of this person. I can see that his body's energy is stronger than the primary limitless individuals. Such strength can't be obtained by the blessing of the outer wall. Aisha should have given him God's marrow. We should be able to find the remnants of God's marrow in his residence. Yes, I'll send someone to check, the old man said in a gloomy tone. The blond old man looked at the old woman. Should we call her over and ask her? Of course. The old woman's face darkened as she said, Call her over. Also, call Hathaway over as well. Yes, the old man replied. There was a slender and steep mountain surrounded by the Dragon Clan. The steps on the mountain were full of fallen leaves and weeds. There was no trace of servants or attendants. A tall and slender figure was standing in front of a high-rise building on the top of the mountain. She was wearing a purple tang suit. There was a huge sword on her back. The width of the sword was wider than her shoulders. The blade was wrapped with white strips of cloth. At the same time, the girl in the tang suit was holding a huge black sword that was more than half a meter wide. She was waving it forward. Every time he swung it, it cut through the air with a whistling sound. She was practicing her swordsmanship. She would swing the sword 20,000 times a day. The black sword wasn't made of ordinary materials. It was mainly made of a mixture of osmium and lead. The blade wasn't sharp. It was quite thick. It wasn't a sword for combat. It was a special sword for her practice. Whoosh, whoosh. The arc of each sword strike was perfect. It could hit the target with the shortest diameter and the fastest route. Suddenly, the eyes of the girl in the tang suit moved slightly. She glanced at the edge of the square. Just as she glanced over, a figure suddenly leaped up from the flat square. It was slender and delicate, but in her hand was a giant black spear that was 4 to 5 meters long and as thick as an arm. The figure landed lightly on the ground, and the tip of her foot touched the ground first. At the moment when she landed, the tip of her foot seemed to be wrapped in wind. Her body was close to the ground as she rushed towards the girl in the tang suit. When she was 5 meters away from her, her body suddenly stopped. She moved like a shadow but was as still as a stone statue. "Sister, are you practicing swordsmanship?" Aisha smiled and looked at the girl in front of her. Her clean and pure eyes were full of concern. If one looked at her expression and tone, she could be regarded as a delicate sister who cared about her elder sister. However, the postures of the two of them, as well as the faint collision of their auras, gave off a feeling that neither of them would give way to the other. The girl in the tang suit slowly stopped waving the black sword. She indifferently looked at Aisha. "What's the matter?" Aisha covered her mouth. "Sister, you said you wouldn't believe me. Why did you go?" "I didn't lie to you. I did find the person who stole the dragon thorn chapter." "Is that so? Congratulations," the girl in the tang suit said indifferently. Aisha smiled and turned her head to look around. There was no one in the empty square and the magnificent tall buildings. She blinked. "My poor sister. This place is so big. Don't you feel lonely living here? Do you want me to send you some servants?" Her tone was concerned and sincere. A cold light flashed in the eyes of the girl in the tang suit. She said indifferently, "Did you come here to provoke me? What's the point of talking about all this before? Don't you know where all my servants are?" Aisha's eyes widened. "Sister, you can't talk nonsense. You are the saint of our dragon clan. How would I dare to provoke you? Besides, how would I know where your servants are?" The girl glanced at her and indifferently said, "It's good to have no servants. You can't understand the quiet life of a person." Chapter 501. Aisha nodded and said, "There is no servant. I have to wash my own clothes and cook my own food. It's hard for me to understand such a life. But sister, if you feel bitter, you can tell me at any time. I can't help you with other things, but I can help you with these small things. After all, we are good sisters. You don't need to be sour with me." The girl indifferently said, "If you have something to say, then say it." Aisha smiled. "I came to tell you a piece of news. Someone in our dragon family stole the book of Dragon Thorn and gave it to an outsider. I caught the person and brought back the book." The girl in the tang suit said indifferently, "I told you, congratulations." Aisha shook her head. "Sister, you know the person I caught. Don't you want to see him?" The face of the girl in the tang suit darkened. She raised her eyes and looked at her. "What do you mean by that?" Aisha looked back at her. "I don't mean anything. I just want to say that you know this person. Maybe you don't remember, but 9 years ago you sneaked out of the inner wall and went to the outer wall. I don't know if you remember or not, but you took a child to an orphanage and gave him your handkerchief." The girl was startled. 9 years ago? She remembered that rainy night. She couldn't stand the pressure and wanted to get away from everything. That's why she climbed over the sighing wall and went to the outer wall. She was walking aimlessly when she saw a boy wearing strange clothes. He had an unusually pale face and was wandering aimlessly in the dark streets. Perhaps it was because of the same loneliness that she took the initiative to approach him. She knew that the rain would hurt the ordinary people in the outer wall. She took the boy under the eaves to shelter from the rain. She asked about the boy's situation during the process. However, the boy spat out a strange language that she had never heard before. It was as if he was speaking in a strange language. Because of this, the incident left a deep impression on her. "But how did you know about this?" The girl's face sank as she coldly stared at her sister. "He was the one who told me everything." Aisha covered her mouth and chuckled. "It's a coincidence." God finally saw the injustice and helped me. I met this person and saw your handkerchief by chance. To be honest, this person is quite sentimental. He actually carries the handkerchief that you gave him with him all this time, as if he is still dreaming of meeting you again. What a silly person. The girl was startled. Aisha smiled as she saw her sister's expression. Now this person has been brought back. He should have been interrogated. I don't know how the elders will deal with him. Dragon worm bites bone? Blood and soil? It's really pitiful. He has been looking forward to meeting you for so many years. The result is that he will be tortured to death in front of your eyes. Aisha sighed and shook her head as she said this. Even if it was only once, I would be doomed eternally. The pale man smiled. Don't belittle yourself. You are not much worse than her. You can do better if the resources of the saintess are given to you. Is there a need to say it? Aisha's eyes were arrogant. She didn't have the slightest smile on her face. Let's go and get ready. The pale man smiled and nodded. Go in. With a shout, the blond youth pushed Dean's back. Dean was pushed forward a few steps into the dark cell. He looked around. There was only a brazier burning. The air was filled with the smell of dead mice and human excrement. It was a separate cell. There was only a trace of light squeezed in through the gap in the door. The only illumination was the brazier in front of him and a few broken lamps on the wall. Be honest. The blond youth snorted and looked at Dean with disgust. You dare to steal my dragon clan's secret fighting technique. You don't know your identity, lowly outer wall mouse. Dean looked at him indifferently, closed his eyes and ignored him. The blond youth didn't continue to stay. He pinched his nose and left the dark cell. Before leaving, he told the guards at the door to keep an eye on him. Dean slowly opened his eyes after the guards left. His face was gloomy. It seemed that he could only wait for the Dragon Clan's judgment. However, it was not his style to be slaughtered. If he was sentenced to death, he must find a way to come up with something that would make the Dragon Clan's heart move and not kill him. It could be information, items, or use value. At the moment, he must do everything to save his life. 8 legendary magic marks, monastery, magic. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. Although he had nothing at the moment, it didn't mean that he couldn't fabricate something. As long as the thing was enough to make the Dragon Clan's heart move, they would verify it. The time in between was an opportunity for him. This time, as long as there was any opportunity to escape, he would seize it even if he had to expose his flying ability. Chapter 502. Dragon Clan Conference Hall. There was a round table in the middle of the dimly lit hall. Chairs were arranged around the table. Behind the table was a bottomless darkness. It was as if they were in a monster's nest. At the head of the table, there was a huge armchair that looked like a black flame. Rather than calling it a chair, it was more like a bed. On both sides of the armchair were black barbs that curved upwards, like the upper and lower eyelashes of a huge eye. On this dragon throne, which was spacious enough to fit 4 or 5 people, lay a graceful figure. This was a young woman dressed in a gorgeous scarlet robe. The scarlet robe was embroidered with black flowers. The robe was extremely long, and it dragged on the ground below the dragon throne. This young woman looked to be in her early 20s, but also seemed to be in her early 30s. She had the pure aura of a young girl, snow-white skin, and the charm of a mature young woman. However, her half-opened eyes were filled with endless golden light, with an extremely calm and indifferent expression. It was as if nothing could disturb her, but also as if she could see through everything. The old woman was standing next to her dragon chair. She bowed her head and looked at her feet in a humble manner. There were people sitting on the chairs on both sides of the round table. Their bodies were hidden in the darkness. Only their silhouettes could be seen. Some of them were petite, like 6 or 7 years old children, less than half a meter tall. Some of them were burly, with 2 sharp black bone spurs protruding from their backs, like some kind of armor. Some of them were lying on the table, like a pile of mud, extremely thin. Ladies and gentlemen. A stalwart figure was sitting on the lower right side of the throne. He crossed his fingers as his elbows rested on the table. His thumb was supporting his chin. His pale golden eyes slowly swept through the crowd. The truth has been investigated. Saintess Aisha stole the dragon thorn and gave it to a friend of the outer wall. Although the dragon thorn has been recovered, but as for how to punish Saintess Aisha, we will vote as usual. Chi. A little girl who was less than half a meter tall giggled. Patriarch, Saintess Aisha is your daughter. How do you think she should be dealt with? The figure indifferently looked at her. I have said that Aisha is no longer my daughter from the day she became a saint. She is our Dragon Clan's saint. She carries all the hope and responsibility of the rise of our clan. Everyone has the right to correct her words and actions. The little girl giggled. Blood is thicker than water. Although Patriarch said so, but I want to hear your opinion on this matter. How are you going to punish her? Fortunately, she didn't fall into the hands of the rock race or the wing race. Otherwise our Dragon Clan would have suffered a big loss. It was a child's handkerchief. There were purple flowers on it. Ha ha! The little girl couldn't help but laugh as she saw the handkerchief. Everyone's eyes narrowed as they recognized that it was the handkerchief of the saintess when she was a child. Moreover, it wasn't a fake. We have investigated and found that Miss Aisha had appeared on the giant wall when Miss Haley led the dragon generals to arrest that person. Miss Aisha's scent is still there. It's not difficult to speculate that Miss Aisha was about to meet that person, but the dragon generals led by Miss Haley were one step ahead and arrested that person. The old woman slowly said. Everyone had different expressions. Some of them had a touch of profound light in their eyes. The guards stationed in the secret technique building said that they saw Miss Aisha there when the dragon thorn scroll was stolen. The old woman whispered, Miss Aisha is the biggest suspect according to all the evidence. We can't shirk it. Have you asked the saintess about this? A skinny old man looked up at her. The little girl giggled. Even if I asked, she wouldn't admit it. The old woman whispered, Miss Aisha said that she didn't steal the dragon thorn scroll. She said that the reason why she appeared on the giant wall was because Miss Haley told her that the person who stole the dragon thorn scroll was there. That's why she rushed over. As for the handkerchief, she said that she left the inner wall 9 years ago. She secretly ran to the outer wall and left the handkerchief behind. I knew it. The little girl smiled and said, no one would admit to such a big thing if they were caught. The thin old man ignored her as he continued to look at the old woman. Does she have any evidence to prove herself? The old woman shook her head. No. The saintess has always lived alone. There is no evidence to prove anything. In my opinion, there is a big problem in this matter. The figure hidden in the darkness said. The saintess also said that it was Miss Hathaway who asked her to go there. Now that the matter has been exposed and the saintess is punished, the person who benefits the most is Miss Hathaway. So, what reason do we have not to suspect that this matter was planned by Miss Hathaway from the beginning to the end? Chapter 503. I can't agree with that. The figure that was previously lying on the table like a pile of mud slowly sat up and said in a hoarse voice, If we talk about conspiracy theories, then isn't this matter up to everyone's imagination? Any speculation is possible. I even suspect that Rock and Wing Clan sent people to plan the whole thing. The purpose is to make us punish the saintess or suspect Princess Haley. But what about the evidence? That's right. The little girl smiled. There is no evidence. It's just nonsense. The skinny old man said, This matter is related to our Dragon Clan saintess. Isn't your attitude too rash? Or are you so eager to deal with Her Highness the Saintess? The so-called doubts are just someone's whims. The little girl looked at him. It's meaningless to sit here and argue if you think there are doubts. It's better to let the dragon guards investigate again. That's a good idea. The skinny old man didn't give in. No need. At this time, the majestic figure slowly said, "The evidence is conclusive. You don't need to question it. I called you here today to discuss how to deal with Aisha. It's not to discuss whether the evidence is credible or not." "Patriarch!" The skinny old man couldn't help but shout. The majestic figure slightly waved his hand and stopped the old man. He looked at the little girl and others. "Everyone, you can speak." The little girl looked at him. "In my opinion, we should follow the rules of the clan. The rules are not strict enough to convince the people. If the rules are broken at will, there will be no prestige." "I agree," the flat figure next to her said. He then went back to the table. Outside the Dragon Clan's conference hall, two slender figures of the same height stood on the platform above the step. They were carrying a giant sword and a giant spear on their back. They were Aisha and the girl in the tang suit. "Father and the elders are inside discussing this matter." Aisha looked at the girl in the tang suit. "My good sister, what do you think the elders will do to you? This is stealing the clan's core secret martial arts. According to the clan's rules, he will have his limbs chopped off and be exiled to the draconic penitentiary for 100 years. The girl in the tang suit stood with her hands clasped behind her back, as if she had not heard her. She just quietly looked at the door of the hall, her eyes as tranquil as a lake. No one knew what she was thinking. "Oh, I almost forgot." Haisha clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Sister, you are the saintess. The elders still need to rely on you to guard the wasteland. How could they be willing to imprison you?" A gentle breeze blew, and the hair on the girl's temples fluttered slightly. Still, there was no reaction. Aisha narrowed her eyes and revealed her white teeth. "I don't know what would happen if I didn't have the identity of saintess." A strange light flashed in the depths of her eyes. The girl's clothes fluttered slightly in the breeze. Hearing this, she pursed her lips and seemed to reveal a smile. She whispered, "Do you really want to get the identity of the saintess?" Aisha saw that she finally opened her mouth and gently smiled, but there was no smile in her eyes. "This is what I deserve. You are just lucky and deeply loved by father, otherwise, loved me? That ruthless man?" The girl slowly turned her head and looked at her sister's face, which was somewhat similar to her own. There was a trace of mockery in her eyes. "I was born to awaken. This is not luck." Hearing this, Aisha's face suddenly turned frosty. "You were born to awaken? Isn't that luck? Did you put in the slightest effort for it?" "You didn't." When she spoke up to hear, a cold smile appeared on the corners of her mouth as she said, "I'm different from you. I'm not as lucky as you, but I have my own ability. I can awaken through hard work, and I can awaken through bitter training. But you can't do this. In the end, you are just lucky." The girl indifferently smiled. "In this world, there is a kind of people called geniuses. This is probably something that mortals like you can never understand." "You." Aisha's face turned red as she clenched her fist. But after a moment, she suddenly thought of something, and the rage on her face swiftly faded like tidewater. She laughed in a low voice. "You're right, big sister. However, you won't be able to go far by relying solely on natural talent, and I have already caught up to you." She raised her head and revealed an innocent and hearty smile. "By the way, I'll let you know that more than 80% of the elders will support me in this meeting, and they will only propose one voting decision, and that is, replacement of saintess." A tall and burly middle-aged man said in a deep voice. There were 2 protruding barbs on each of his shoulders. It was as if he was wearing a layer of ferocious armor. His figure was shrouded in shadows. "Miss Aisha is a saintess. If she is directly dealt with, then it will be beneath the status of saintess. She has committed such a big taboo this time. I suggest that Miss Aisha resign from her position as saintess. Second Princess Haley will temporarily replace her. When Miss Aisha makes up for her mistake, then she will be reinstated as saintess." "Yes." The little girl nodded. "She is a saintess, but she doesn't set an example. Instead, she has repeatedly violated the taboo. I suggest to temporarily resign from her position. Seconded. 7 or 8 people raised their hands in agreement. Seeing this situation, the rest of the people couldn't help but turn their eyes to the patriarch under the dragon throne. The patriarch's face turned ugly. It's impossible to resign from the position of saintess. Wing Race and Rock Race will inevitably investigate this matter if we replace saintess for no reason. Moreover, we must give a reasonable explanation to the people. Otherwise, how can we convince them? Yes, the thin old man immediately said. Moreover, saintess needs to awaken the dragon bloodline and be equipped with the power to guard the wasteland. Miss Haley is still young. I'm afraid she won't be able to do it. The burly middle-aged man looked at him and said, As far as I know, Miss Haley seems to have awakened the power of dragon bloodline. Moreover, she is also a pioneer. Her strength is not inferior to Aisha. She is enough to guard the wasteland. Princess Haley has awakened the power of dragon bloodline? How is it possible? When did this happen? How come we don't know about it? Hearing this, the skinny old man and the few others who did not raise their hands to support the motion were all shocked as they looked at each other. Chapter 504. 10 rounds? Isn't that a bit too difficult? A burly figure sitting below the patriarch said in a low voice, As far as I know, Princess Hathaway is also a pioneer. If she has awakened the power of her bloodline, her strength should be equal to that of the saintess. I don't think there are many people here who can defeat her in 10 rounds. Yes. The petite elder's expression was solemn as he said, Her Highness the Saintess has cultivated the Dragon Emperor's secret skill, and it has long been ingrained into her bones. If we restrict her from using the Dragon Emperor's secret skill, it will instead make her feel awkward in battle. In my opinion, 30 rounds is more like it. Agreed. The shadow who was previously hidden in the darkness said, 10 rounds is too much. If it's 30 rounds, then there's still some hope. It can be considered a fair contest. The little girl chuckled. Aisha has been a saintess for so many years. She often shuttles back and forth in the wasteland. Her fighting skills are different from ordinary people. If she can't defeat Princess Haley in 10 rounds, then what ability does she have to continue to be a saintess? 10 rounds is more than enough in a life-and-death fight between masters. Do you want to compete in endurance for 30 rounds? Humph. Endurance is one of the keys to victory. Princess Haley can't be a saintess if she doesn't have enough endurance. Ridiculous. The duel between masters is about killing moves and adaptations. What's the use of endurance to drag down the opponent? Why don't you just say that you can defeat Princess Haley in 1 round? Wouldn't it be more straightforward? 1 round? I want to do it as long as you agree. The 2 sides of the round table were arguing with each other. Shut up. The patriarch, who had been silent, suddenly opened his mouth. His voice covered the hall. Everyone looked at the patriarch. 10 rounds. 10 rounds. The patriarch said indifferently, If Aisha can't defeat Haley, then abdicate. Patriarch, this. The skinny old man and others hurriedly opened their mouth. The patriarch shook his head as he looked at the little girl and the others. Aisha will continue to be the saintess if Haley is defeated. The matter of leaking dragon thorn will be dealt with lightly. If Aisha can't defeat Haley in 10 rounds, it will prove that Haley has the ability to become a saint. Haley will be the temporary saint in the future. After Aisha reflects, we will discuss the replacement. I agree. The little girl smiled, her eyes as beautiful as crescent moons. The rest of the people around her also seconded and agreed. The skinny old man and the others opened their mouths slightly and sighed in the end. Since the clan leader had already said so, it was useless for them to continue arguing. After all, the other party had the upper hand in terms of vote. Dragon Mother, what do you think of this suggestion? The leader turned to the noblewoman sitting on the dragon chair at the top of the round table. Hearing the patriarch's words, the conference hall became slightly quiet. Everyone turned their heads to look at the luxurious and graceful figure on the dragon throne. They could not help but withdraw their unnecessary emotions, and were somewhat serious and solemn. The noblewoman had been lazily leaning on the soft pillow in the dragon chair. There was no trace of change in her expression. At this moment, when she heard the patriarch's question, she slightly moved her eyes. Her amber eyes swept over everyone. Everyone who looked at her subconsciously slightly lowered their heads. They didn't dare to look directly at her eyes. "You are the patriarch. You decide." The noblewoman slowly withdrew her gaze and indifferently said, "Since most people agree on this point, let's implement it. The two sisters must be impatient waiting outside. Call them in." Seeing that the dragon mother didn't intervene, the little girl and the others heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. The skinny old man and others had a trace of disappointment in their eyes. They sighed in their heart. They knew that this matter couldn't be reversed. "Call them in," the patriarch ordered in the darkness behind. A voice came from the darkness, followed by a breeze. A moment later, the sound of 2 light footsteps could be heard from outside the dimly lit conference hall. Their footsteps were calm as they walked over step by step, neither fast nor slow. The next moment, 2 stunning faces with somewhat similar contours appeared at the end of the round table. It was the girl in the tang suit who had been waiting outside the door and Aisha, who was in Dean's eyes. Both of them were similar in height and clothes. However, one was wearing a purple tang suit and the other was wearing a green chong sam. They were like 2 bright autumn flowers. The girl in the tang suit had a calm expression, and there was a hint of coldness on her face. It was as if she didn't care about anything outside of the world. If one looked closely, they would find that her temperament and appearance were somewhat similar to that of the noblewoman on the dragon throne. Aisha, who was next to her, looked a bit immature. Although her expression was calm, there seemed to be a soft smile on her face. It made people feel very close to her. Hathaway pays her respects to Dragon Mother, clan leader, and elders. Aisha, who was wearing a green chong sam, bowed her head and said, "Dean would be stunned if he was here." Aisha greets the Dragon Mother and Patriarch. The girl in the tang suit just nodded slightly to show her respect. As for the other people at the round table, she did not even look at them. She was the Holy Maiden, whose status was second only to the Dragon Mother and the Patriarch. When these elders saw her, they should take the initiative to greet her. This was their status and also the rule. The noblewoman sitting on the dragon chair stared at her and nodded slightly. There was a trace of a smile on her lips. "You are here." The Patriarch looked at the 2 equally outstanding daughters. There was a trace of complexity in his eyes. He slightly squeezed his fingers under the table. "Aisha, you can't escape from the crime of losing the dragon thorn. The evidence is conclusive. Do you plead guilty?" The girl in the tang suit was calm. It seemed that she had expected him to say this. "I don't." The Patriarch was startled. "You don't?" The middle-aged man sitting opposite him said in a deep voice. "The evidence is conclusive. Do you still not admit it?" The girl in the tang suit said indifferently, "No matter what evidence you have, I won't admit it if I haven't done it. But it doesn't matter to you whether I admit it or not. You have asked us to come here, so you should have discussed the verdict. So just pronounce the verdict." The little girl smiled faintly and said, "Your Highness Saintess, you speak as if we are wrongly accusing you. Evidence is evidence. You did something wrong, so you should pay the price." The girl in the tang suit looked at the little girl. "What price do you want me to pay?" Being stared at by the Saintess, the little girl suddenly felt as if she couldn't hide the secret in her heart. She couldn't help but look away and say, "Your Highness Saintess, the verdict was decided by everyone. If you want to explain, it's still not too late, no need." The girl in the tang suit interrupted her. The little girl's eyes flashed with a trace of anger. The skinny old man and the others sighed and shook their heads. The Patriarch was silent for a moment before he said in a low voice, After the discussion between me and the 12 elders, we have unanimously decided that you and Hathaway will fight, and you will be prohibited from using the Dragon Emperor's secret skill. If you can defeat her within 10 rounds, you will continue to be the Saintess, and the matter of you losing the Dragon Thorn chapter will also be dealt with lightly. If you can't defeat Hathaway, then Hathaway will replace you as the Saintess for the time being, and when you reflect on your actions, you will be transferred back. Do you have any objection to this verdict? In the conference hall, everyone's eyes fell on the girl in the tang suit, and they all had different expressions. The girl in the tang suit faced everyone's gaze, but her expression didn't change. She just remained silent. Aisha, if you have any objection, you can raise it. The patriarch saw her silent for a long time. A trace of complexity flashed in his eyes as he spoke again. The girl in the tang suit was silent for a moment. I have no objection. Hearing her words, the hearts of many people at the round table immediately relaxed, and they heaved a sigh of relief. There was a trace of joy in the depths of Hathaway's eyes. Chapter 505. Hathaway froze for a moment and suddenly laughed out loud. 1 round? Do you mean to say that you can defeat me in 1 move? Elder sister, now that things have come to this, do you think anyone will believe you? If you really have such ability, then why don't you dare to accept the challenge? Why should you abstain? If you are afraid of failure, then admit it. After all, it is not a good feeling to be overtaken by someone who used to be far behind you. Overtaken? Aisha looked at her indifferently. You are right, I am indeed afraid. Hathaway was slightly surprised to see her admit it. In her impression, this sister who had always liked to be aloof wasn't someone who would bow her head and admit defeat so easily. However, she was also a person who was difficult to figure out. Hathaway quickly reacted as her eyes revealed a smile. She grinned, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. Sister, it is good that you admit it. I won't laugh at you after all. It is polite to listen to people finish their words. Aisha interrupted her and said in a teaching tone. The smile on Hathaway's face suddenly froze. Aisha said in a dull voice, I don't accept the challenge because I am afraid that I will accidentally use too much strength and kill you on the spot on the duel field. Then, no one can replace me in the position of Saintess. Hathaway was startled as the smile on her face slowly converged. She stared at her sister. Is that so? Sister, I suddenly want to see your ability. However, it is not the same as before. I have also awakened the power of my bloodline. We are both pioneers. Although my physique is slightly inferior to yours, but it is not realistic for you to defeat me as easily as before. She slightly sneered. I haven't learned the Dragon Emperor's secret skills, but it is precisely because of this that I can calm down for so many years and put all my energy into universal fighting techniques. To tell you the truth, I have completely mastered the entire universal fighting technique. What about you, sister? Haha, your mind is used on the more advanced Dragon Emperor's secret skills. Don't forget the rules set by the elders. It is forbidden to use the Dragon Emperor's secret skills. Once you don't use the Dragon Emperor's secret skills, you are far inferior to me. Moreover, you have learned the Dragon Emperor's secret skills so deeply that your body can react without thinking. But once you use it, you will lose to me. So, on one hand, you have to fight with your own body, and on the other hand, you are using your unskilled general combat skills to fight with me. Even if you have rich battle experience, you will still be defeated. At this point, the corner of her lips curled into a smile. The elders fought for 10 rounds for me, and it was only to ensure that nothing goes wrong. But in reality, not to mention 10 rounds, even if you were given 20 or 30 rounds, you wouldn't be able to defeat me. Moreover, you would be defeated by me and fall from your altar into the dirt. At that time, everyone will see my strength and know how much effort I have put in for so many years. You will become the perfect foundation for me to ascend to the position of Saintess. Aisha looked at her quietly without a trace of reaction on her face. Hathaway looked at her in silence. She chuckled and said, "It's a pity that as my sister, you're just like me. You're too smart. Knowing that you're no match for the enemy, you're not a brave person, you're a fool. This time you retreat and keep your white feather clothes, but next time you won't be so lucky. I have always been different from you." Aisha corrected with a serious expression as if she was stating a fact. Hathaway laughed and said, "Indeed different. If you can be like me, you won't be pulled down from the altar by me. Sister, you can't go far by relying on talent alone. This time, you lost to me because of your arrogance. Do you know why so many elders chose to support me, a person whose talent is far less than yours? Because you like to pretend to be aloof and disdain everyone. No one likes to bow and scrape to others. The elders have long been tired of your aloof face. But I am different. I crawled out of the mud. I don't care if there are more stains on my body as long as I can succeed in the end. Although I have nothing, I can let these elders know that when I become a saintess, they will also get the rights granted by the saintess. And you are really too proud. Proud to the point of being stupid." She retracted her smile and stared at her sister, saying, "Only I know what you've done for the family and how much you've done for the family. But so what? You have given everything. So what? In this world, people don't know how to be grateful for what you have done. No one will care about what you have done behind your back. Just like me, people only like to see the result. A person who has given his heart and soul to help others is never as good as a lazy relative who reaps without sowing. Why? Because that is his relative. He can even criticize everyone for his useless relative, no matter what kind of contribution that person has made and how much effort he has put in for them. In the same way, for the elders, although they know your importance, they just treat you as a tool in the family. But I am different because they can get benefits from me. Moreover, with your example, as long as I give them a little benefit, they will feel that there is a difference between you and them." Aisha was slightly silent. Seeing that she finally acquiesced and couldn't say anything, Hathaway couldn't help but smile. How could the purpose of her saying this be simple venting? Instead, it was to give her arrogant sister the heaviest blow. It would also make her lose confidence in the family and the elders. In this case, to a great extent, it could also cut off her thoughts of reclaiming the position of saintess. Although she wasn't afraid. She had always liked to do things to the fullest. She would never miss any chance to eliminate a crisis, even if the probability of such a crisis happening was only 1 in 10,000. Because of her careful and meticulous management, she was able to climb to the supreme position of the Dragon Clan from nothing to where she was today. She was above the entire clan, and she only had to listen to the leader and Dragon Mother. Moreover, the saintess' other identity was the future Dragon Mother. As long as she kept this identity, when the Patriarch and Dragon Mother passed away in the future, she would be the new Dragon Mother. She would also be the supreme existence of the entire Dragon Clan. She would be able to overrule all the proposals of the elders and grasp the real decision-making power. It was also because of this identity that the elders saw the benefits and did not hesitate to help her. "Sister, before I learn the Dragon Emperor's secret skill, I will have to trouble you to continue to guard the wasteland." Hathaway giggled. If one didn't hear what she said just now, they would only think that she was an innocent girl just by looking at her current appearance. Aisha sighed and said, "It seems that you have really grown up." Hathaway smiled. "Sister used to stand too high so you couldn't see me. In fact, I have grown up a long time ago." "That's true." Aisha nodded slightly and smiled. "You should study well. The Dragon Emperor's secret skill is a bit difficult. If you don't understand, you can ask Grandmother Dragon Mother. I will guard the wasteland for you during this time." Haley froze for a moment as she saw Aisha's smile. She leaned close to Aisha and their noses almost touched. She carefully looked at Aisha's eyes, Sister, are you trying to cover the pain in your heart with a smile? Her tone and expression were full of concern, but her words couldn't hide the malicious ridicule in them. Pain? Aisha's mouth slightly pursed as she revealed a smile. Hathaway returned to her original position. You have always cared about the identity of Saintus. Now that you have lost it, your heart should be in despair and pain. Haha. It's a pity that this despair and pain has been with me since childhood. Now I will return it to you. Despair? Pain? Aisha's calm face showed a slight smile. You are wrong. I have just freed myself from despair and pain. This moment is one of the few happy moments in my life. Sister, you have a bad habit. You always like to be brave. Hathaway smiled. Don't you know that a woman is the most beautiful when she is weak? Weak. There was a trace of longing in Aisha's eyes. All women in the giant wall can be weak, but I can't. Chapter 506. The longing in Aisha's eyes disappeared as she restored her usual calm appearance. She quietly looked at Hathaway. You have grown up. You can carry the burden of a saintess. I have completed my mother's entrustment. From now on, you'd better behave yourself. Also, let me give you a piece of advice. You've already obtained what you've longed for. Don't provoke me anymore. In the future, I won't show you any mercy. Hathaway froze for a moment. There was a bit of ridicule in her eyes. Mother's entrustment? That woman is long dead. What did she entrust to you? Merciful? When I learn the Dragon Emperor's secret skill, I'll be the one who shows mercy. Snap. Suddenly a crisp sound spread out. Hathaway's words came to an abrupt end as she froze on the spot. There was a slender palm print on her delicate cheek. Aisha slowly retracted her palm. Her calm eyes turned into a trace of coldness. You shouldn't blaspheme Mother at any time. Hathaway was stunned for a long time. She slowly recovered and looked at Aisha incredulously. Although she had repeatedly lost to Aisha since childhood, but she had never been slapped by Aisha. What was even more unacceptable was that she didn't react at all. Was it the Dragon Emperor's secret skill? She instantly thought of this, and a wave of humiliation and rage surged out from her heart. She clenched her fists tightly, and she was angered to the point her entire body trembled as she said, You dare hit me? You dare to call father that man? Why can't I call her that woman? She left all the good things to you. She didn't give anything to me. You awakened your bloodline at birth. You are loved by the whole family. What about me? I have nothing. I was called an ominous witch when I was born. Why do you treat me like this? Because I didn't awaken my bloodline at birth? Aisha's eyes were cold. You can settle accounts with others, but you shouldn't call Mother like that. This is my last warning to you. If I hear you say that again, I will kill you. When she said the last sentence, the killing intent in her eyes almost overflowed. It was so strong that the surrounding air seemed to have gone silent. Hathaway saw the killing intent in her eyes and her heart palpitated. She suddenly became clear-headed. Her intuition told her that this time her sister wasn't joking, but she would really do it. She slowly clenched her fists in her sleeves, lowered her head and bit her lips. She felt so humiliated that she couldn't wait to learn the Dragon Emperor's secret skill. Do you know how Mother died? Aisha looked at Hathaway, who bowed her head and said word by word. Hathaway was stunned. In her memory, she had never seen her mother's appearance. It was said that she had died not long after she was born, so in her heart, she had no concept of her mother. However, this did not prevent her from hating and being jealous. Of course you don't know. Aisha stared at her coldly. Because my mother was the patriarch's wife, no one dared to mention the cause of her death to you. Do you know why your clansmen call you the ominous witch? Because the day you were born was the anniversary of Mother's death. Hathaway froze. My birthday is the anniversary of my mother's death? Could it be? Yes, Mother had a difficult birth. Moreover, it wasn't an ordinary woman's difficult birth. The situation was urgent at that time and there was no cure. Aisha looked at her coldly. The priest said that they could only protect one. Haha, that damned man. He was actually so heartless to choose to protect you. Hathaway was stunned on the spot as if she was struck by lightning. For so many years, every time you celebrated your birthday, that man would accompany you. Aisha's expression was cold, but there was a trace of tears in her eyes. When you were a child, didn't you always clamor for me to accompany you on your birthday? Oh, if I accompanied you, then who would accompany our dead mother? That man was afraid that you would know about it when you grew up, so he buried our mother in the dragon tomb and forbade others to visit her. The purpose was to make people forget about this matter so that you would be free from that shadow. But everyone doesn't remember Mother, but I will. I will always remember. Hathaway looked at her blankly. Her mind was somewhat blank. If my mother hadn't entrusted you to me on her deathbed and asked me to take good care of you, Aisha stared at her coldly. Do you think that I would tolerate your little tricks over and over again for so many years? All the things that I loved and cherished were taken away by you. Do you know why I have been holding on to the saintess identity? Hathaway looked at her as her mind was in chaos. Because you are too weak. Aisha's words went straight to the deepest part of her heart. You are so weak. If I gave you the saintess identity, then it would be harming you. That's why I have been holding on to it. But you didn't believe me. No matter how many times I told you, you didn't believe me. You thought that I was afraid of losing this identity and everything. Do you know why I went to the outer wall 9 years ago? Because I've had enough. I'm about to collapse. I never wanted to be a saintess. I spent my childhood in the Dragon Emperor Tower. The first thing I would do when I woke up every day was to practice. When I was tired, I would read books and read the secret fighting books of my ancestors. Aisha revealed a trace of ridicule when she mentioned this memory. You have mastered all the fighting skills you mentioned. But for me, these things have been engraved into my bones since I was 7 years old. Hathaway's pupils shrank as she looked at her in horror. 7 years old? Mastered all the fighting techniques? How could it be possible? No one knew better than her how difficult it was to master all the fighting techniques. Even for her, she had only learned all of them when she was 13 years old. It was only in the past 2 years that she could say that it was engraved into her bones, and she could react accordingly without using her brain. But 7 years old, what kind of price and effort did she have to pay in such a short period of time? Looking at Hathaway's expression, the corner of Aisha's mouth twitched slightly. She suddenly felt bored. After a while, she slowly said, Now that you have awakened the power of the bloodline, you can be regarded as a qualified pioneer. You can barely stand in the wasteland. I have completed my mother's entrustment. From now on, I have no obligation to protect you. I hope you can take care of yourself. After saying that, he tossed the bundle onto his back, brushed past Zhang Xian's shoulder, and strode away. Hathaway was stunned on the spot. At the instant they brushed past each other, she felt that the world had suddenly fallen into an expanse of blankness. Only when clear footsteps sounded out from behind her did her 5 senses return to reality. She couldn't help but turn around and say, Wait, is what you said true? Why didn't you tell me these things before? Why? Aisha's footsteps paused. Because everyone wants you to have a good childhood. Chapter 507. In the depths of the Dragon Clan's mountains. In a cave that looked like a natural nest, the scorching light of the fire shone on the rock wall. The air was filled with extremely hot airwaves. On the bumpy rock wall, traces of blood-like viscous liquid slowly seeped out, flowing along the veins of the rock wall into a huge crimson pool of fire at the bottom. The brightly colored magma pool kept bubbling up one after another, and when it burst, it emitted even more scalding hot air. A figure with white skin was soaking in the middle of the lava pool. Her face was shrouded in steam. It was Dragon Mother who was lying on the huge dragon throne in the conference hall. Her dark red rose-colored hair was scattered in the pool. The color was reserved and gorgeous, exposing her fair shoulder blades, neck, and snow-white buttocks. Her eyes were closed as she soaked in the boiling magma pool. Her delicate skin was not eroded by the magma pool at all. Around her soaking body, white mist rose continuously, as if a large amount of water was evaporating. The old woman called Larina was standing next to the bright red lava pool. She was still wearing a simple robe. Her wrinkled face was covered with sweat. Her clothes and sideburns were wet. The sweat didn't flow down as it was evaporated by the high temperature. She looked at Dragon Mother in the lava pool, her eyes sparkling as she said in a low voice, "Miss, the succession of saintesses rarely happened before. Why did you agree to their proposal? Those elders are close to the second princess. I'm afraid that there is another reason behind the loss of the Dragon Thorn chapter. Her Highness Aisha has always been disobedient, but she is always thinking about the family. She shouldn't do such a thing." Dragon Mother slowly said, "It doesn't matter what the truth is. The important thing is that so many elders are supporting the second princess. It means that it's time for her to abdicate." Larina couldn't help but say, "Miss, you have the absolute right. It's useless to support the second princess if you don't agree. Moreover, the second princess is too young and her talent is far less than Aisha's. Although she has awakened her bloodline power, but the time is too short. I'm afraid it will be difficult for her to guard the wasteland and shoulder the heavy responsibility of a saint. Therefore, she must master the Dragon Emperor's secret technique as soon as possible. In the future, she will also have to compete with the holy sons and holy daughters of the winged race and the rock race." The Dragon Emperor's tone was calm, without the slightest ripple. Larina smiled bitterly. "With the second princess's aptitude, I'm afraid it'll take her a year and a half to master the Dragon King's secret skill. Even if she were to undergo saintess training, it would still be very difficult. Moreover, the second princess is good at scheming and not good at fighting. In the future, I'm afraid." She didn't continue because the answer was obvious. The lair fell into silence. After a long while, Dragon Mother slowly opened her eyes. However, the strange thing was that her pupils were icy white instead of the amber color of the dragon race's traditional bloodline. In the past 2 years, the frequency of wyverns has increased. Dragon Mother looked at Larina. "The Kingdom of God is going to carry out a new round of selection." Dragon Mother's words didn't answer Larina's previous question. Larina was startled when she heard this. Her pupils shrank and her wrinkled eyes trembled. "Is it going to start again? Miss, do you want to let Princess Haley replace Her Highness Aisha?" This. Dragon Mother's eyes fell on Larina. Her invisible gaze was like a feather, but it carried endless power. Larina felt pressure and awe. "Aisha is the most talented person in our dragon clan in the past 100 years. She has just turned 19 this year. She has awakened her bloodline for the 3rd time. She is 2 years faster than me. Perhaps she will have a chance to complete the 7th awakening in her lifetime and break through the cage." Larina's complexion changed as she looked at Dragon Mother. "3rd awakening? Her Highness Aisha has awakened her bloodline for the 3rd time?" Dragon Mother said slowly, "Even without Hathaway, I would have removed her position as the Holy Maiden. This time, Hathaway has shown up, and she can replace her. No matter what happens, she is the hope of our dragonkind, and we can't lose her. Understood?" Larina blankly looked at Dragon Mother. She was at a loss. After a moment, she suddenly thought of something that made her heart palpitate. Princess Haley's awakening. Dragon Mother looked at Larina with deep eyes. Larina felt as if a huge mountain was pressing on her shoulders. She didn't dare to breathe. "My illness is getting more and more difficult to suppress." Dragon Mother slowly lowered her head. She looked at the magma pool in front of her. "The future of the Dragon Clan depends on Aisha. You must take good care of her." Larina was shocked. "Miss, your illness has flared up again? How is it possible? Is the temperature not high enough? This place can melt steel." Dragon Mother slightly shook her head and lowered her eyelids. Her body slowly sank a bit deeper. In the dark prison cell, Dean was sitting on the cold ground. It had been a day since he was caught. He hadn't eaten a single grain and his stomach was growling. Don't think that the higher the physique, the more resistant you are to hunger. On the contrary, the higher the physique, the greater the need for food. Unless you put yourself into a sleeping state like a snake, then your stomach and body functions would go into a deep sleep. In this way, the heat and food would be retained in the body to meet the long-term needs. But if there was an intense exercise, the stomach and body would quickly squeeze the food out of the stomach. The hunger would come faster and more unbearable. The most terrible thing was that his need for heat was far higher than the average person. He hugged his body and curled up in the corner like a worm. When he couldn't stand the cold anymore, he would control his muscles to generate heat. However, the effect of this was undoubtedly an overdraft of his physical strength. What followed was even more intense hunger and cold. Am I going to starve to death here? Dean couldn't help but think about it. His heart trembled. He was angry and had a strong killing intent. Squeak! Dean didn't know how much time had passed when he heard the sound of the door opening. The sound was like the sound of nature. He was overjoyed. He tried to look up but found that his body was stiff as he curled up for a long time. Greetings, Your Highness. This subordinate greets Your Highness Saintess. Your Highness, why are you here? Chapter 508. Saint. Dean was startled. Is it Aisha's sister? While he was deep in thought, a faint fragrance wafted over from the dark prison cell. It did not smell like any perfume or rouge. Following it was a slender and graceful figure, carrying a huge sword on her back. When they saw her face, both of them were stunned, and blurted out almost in unison, "It's you!" Aisha was surprised to see Dean curled up in the cage. She had a good memory since childhood. At a glance, she recognized the boy that she had met once. Moreover, the situation of that meeting was a bit special. It left a deep impression on her. At this moment, she never thought that the boy who was framed by her sister and sent to the orphanage would be the one she met last time when they were hunting the splitter. Dean was also surprised as he didn't expect to meet the girl who had killed the splitter here. Many doubts in his heart were instantly answered. Aisha had said that her sister could hunt monsters within level 100. But this girl could easily defeat the splitter last time. Although the splitter had just laid eggs and was injured by him, but it was a legendary monster. There was a world of difference between a legendary monster and an ordinary monster at the same hunting level. In short, both of them were level 20 monsters. But a legendary monster could easily kill an ordinary monster. But a legendary monster was far beyond the hunting level defined in the Monster Atlas. For example, the legendary splitter, which was level 68, was not inferior to an ordinary monster, which was level 100. It was obvious that she was Aisha's bad sister, since she had such strength, and was a member of the Dragon Clan. Of course, he wouldn't believe Aisha's nonsense now that he was in such a situation. "Are you Haley?" Dean asked. Aisha was surprised. She shook her head. "I'm Aisha. The person who was in contact with you is my sister Haley." "Are you Aisha?" Dean was startled. "No wonder she didn't worry that I would confess to her when she caught me. It's because I would only confess to Aisha. Sure enough, she's calculated everything, including my resistance. She's going to make use of everything." Thinking of this, all the mysteries in his heart were solved. When Hathaway saw his handkerchief, she recognized it as her sister's, so she used him and pretended to be her sister to get in touch with him. The first time they met, she invited him to join the Dragon Clan. She tried to let him enter the inner wall. It was obvious that if he agreed, then she would take him to a forbidden area of the Dragon Clan. At that time, the dragons would inevitably arrest him and investigate him in detail. Then they would follow the clues and point the spearhead to Aisha. But at that time, he refused. Moreover, he had become suspicious at that time, and Hathaway had probably seen through this. Hence, when they met again, she wasn't as impatient as the first time. She didn't confess and invite him. "I see that your body temperature is very low." "I'm sorry." Dean didn't seem to hear her words. He lowered his eyes and clenched his fists tightly. "I hurt you, He rarely blamed himself, but this time he felt a strong sense of guilt from the bottom of his heart. This sense of guilt twisted his heart into a ball, as if his body was being strangled, making it difficult for him to breathe. The reason why he wore the handkerchief was that he hoped that if he met the little girl again in the future, he could return her kindness. However, not only did he not return this kindness to her, but he also hurt her again. Although he knew that the main cause of this incident was Hathaway's plan, and his hatred and killing intent towards her were the same thing, it was an unavoidable fact that he had fallen into her trap. He wouldn't completely vent his anger on her, but he regretted that he didn't listen to his intuition when he noticed that something was strange, but was swayed by his own feelings. Seeing Dean's painful look, Aisha was slightly startled. She didn't expect that this person, whom she had only met twice, would blame himself for this matter. There was a trace of apology in her heart, and she whispered, "I'm the one who should say sorry. If I hadn't indulged her for so many years, she wouldn't have done such a thing. She just wanted to deal with me, but she got you involved. It's me who implicated you." Dean still lowered his head, slightly shook his head, and said in a hoarse voice, "If I could be more sensitive, I wouldn't have fallen into her trap, and there wouldn't be today's situation. Not only did I let myself fall into such a situation, but I also hurt you. This is a failure, a fatal failure. If I could be more rational, trust my intuition, and hold the attitude of, I would rather kill the wrong person than let go, I wouldn't have been deceived by her." Aisha suddenly felt that there was a stubbornness in this boy, a lonely stubbornness. Her eyes flashed slightly, and her cheeks softened a bit. "That's right, but you believed her because you thought she was me, so you didn't guard against her." Hearing her comforting words, Dean knew that she was right. This time he wasn't rational enough. He didn't listen to his intuition several times, but was swayed by his subjective feelings. This made the pain and hatred in his heart stronger, and at the same time, there was a trace of confusion. He didn't hate Haley, but himself. A kind person will be gullible to others. A bad person will be ruthless when dealing with others, and would rather kill the wrong person than let go. But, for familiar people, close friends, relatives, lovers, if because of a little suspicion they would rather kill the wrong person than let go, then what kind of person are they? Or are they still human? But if I don't, how many people will pretend to be my relatives, friends, and stab me when I'm least prepared? Chapter 509. Aisha's lips slightly moved as she saw Dean's depressed look. "You don't have to blame yourself for anything. She was deliberately using you. It would be strange if you were aware of it. Moreover, I should thank you for this matter. Thank you for letting me get rid of the identity of a saint. I can live freely like others." Dean was startled as he looked up at her. "I was born with awakened ability. I have been given high expectations since childhood. I have been undergoing rigorous training since I can remember." There was a faint smile hanging on Aisha's mouth. There was a bit of reminiscence in her eyes. Day after day of training, learning, fighting. I am like a puppet that exists to kill. Today, finally, this shackle no longer shackles me. So, I really want to thank you. She stared at Dean with a serious expression. Dean was startled. He didn't expect that a girl who was a little older than him would lead such a boring and monotonous life. This matter is a good thing for me, but... Aisha looked at Dean with a trace of apology in her eyes. I'm really sorry for involving you in this matter. You almost lost your life. Dean's mouth slightly moved as he shook his head. It's not you who should say sorry. Moreover, I'm used to such things. He had been inexplicably involved in several crises in the past and almost lost his life. He still remembered the physical examination when he entered the school. The radiation value in his blood had reached the standard, and he was taken to the hunter's constitution test. He almost lost his life because two hunters were talking to each other. Later, he was framed by Jenny's father because he liked Jenny's daughter. Including this time, because of the fight between Aisha and Hathaway, he was involved in it and almost lost his life. The reasons for these dangers were comical and laughable to him, but this was the true nature of this world. The root cause was that he was too weak. The weak were always out of control of their own lives. Hunters were like this, and so were ordinary people. A diligent worker may lose his position and source of income because of the arrival of the superior's relatives. An excellent soldier could lose his life because of a bad bet made by an officer. As the saying goes, "My fate is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens, and man can conquer nature." Was the heaven here referring to the emotionless dead thing that overlooked all living beings and turned a blind eye to countless injustices and sufferings? The real heaven referred to people like the Son of Heaven in ancient times, who stood at the highest point. Only humans could decide the life and death of others, and they could also make others wish they were dead. Aisha was silent for a moment after hearing Dean's words. "You will have a hard time in the future. I hope you can stick to it. If there is a chance, I will apply to the Patriarch to let you return to your original life. From now on." Dudian was startled. "You mean, your dragon clan won't execute me?" Haisha nodded. "I have already told the Patriarch that he will keep you alive. But based on my understanding of him, he should transfer you to the Dragon Guards and use you as a waste." Recycling? Dean's mouth twitched as he heard her blunt words. But as long as he could live, it didn't matter if he was treated as waste by the Dragon Clan. So what if he was used as waste? However, listening to Aisha's tone, the Dragon Guards didn't seem to be a good job. He asked, "What does the Dragon Guards do? Does it have anything to do with the wasteland?" There was a trace of surprise in Aisha's eyes. She didn't expect Dudian to know the existence of the wasteland. But she quickly thought of her sister Hathaway and understood. She nodded. "Yes, the responsibility of the Dragon Guards is to assist the pioneers to clean up the monsters in the outer edge of the wasteland. It is similar to the hunters in the outer wall, but the monsters they encounter are much stronger, and the mortality rate is higher." Dudian was startled and suddenly understood. No wonder they were used as waste. Their work outside the wall could be sacrificed at any time. However, it was normal for the Dragon Clan to do so. When he was caught here, he didn't think that he could survive or leave easily. After all, he had obtained the secret fighting scroll of the Dragon Clan. If he let him go, wouldn't it be the same as leaking the secret fighting techniques of the Dragon Clan? It didn't matter if he was sent to be the Dragon Guards, even if he was sacrificed. It was indeed recycling. Fortunately, I can still live. Dudian wasn't worried. Instead, he was secretly glad. Aisha saw that Dudian was startled and didn't speak. "You don't have to worry. Although you will be a Dragon Guard, it won't be difficult to survive as long as you are careful. Moreover, the family will give you God's marrows and fighting techniques to improve your combat effectiveness. It will allow you to reach the basic standard of the Dragon Guards, which is the level of a senior limitless." Dudian nodded slightly. But he wasn't too happy in his heart. After all, God's marrows were dead things. In the eyes of the Dragon Clan, they were just some materials. These materials were given to him to improve his combat effectiveness. They also hoped that he could better complete the tasks of the Dragon Guards. After all, even if it was a waste, it had to be used to make good use of it. "What are your magic marks?" Aisha asked. Dean glanced at her, his mind turning. Aisha saw the subtle changes in his face as he was about to tell a lie. She knew that she had touched the privacy of others. She immediately changed her words. "Is it a rare level? If not, I can provide you with a good rare level magic mark so that your survivability can be improved. After all, you were involved in this matter because of me. I'm the one who harmed you." Dudien knew her intention when he heard her question. He shook his head. I would have died if it wasn't for you. This should be the second time you saved me. Aisha shook her head. You wouldn't have encountered such danger if it wasn't for me. Dudien deeply looked at her but didn't say anything. He knew that it would be difficult to repay the girl's help. After the incident with Hathaway, he was clear that before he became strong enough, he would only harm himself and others if he tried to repay the kindness of others. Do you need to replace your rare magic marks? Aisha said. I have Steel Dragon, Devourer, Black Weaver, and Silicon Rock in my hands. They are all rare magic marks with strong life-saving properties. Dudien could see that she really wanted to help him. However, the girl's expression was always flat when she spoke. It seemed that she didn't know how to get along with people. He shook his head. No, I'm used to it. I'm not used to replacing it with other magic marks. You have helped me enough. I can survive this time because of you. He wanted to say that he would repay her if he had a chance in the future. But he didn't say it. It was meaningless to say it. After all, she didn't expect him to repay her for what she had done for him. Yes. Aisha nodded. The magic marks are the most suitable for you. In that case, you should stick to it. Dudien nodded. Aisha didn't say anything more. She looked at him meaningfully and turned to leave the cell. Dudien looked at her back through the bars of the cell. He slowly retracted his gaze. His depressed mood was filled with hope again. But suddenly he thought of one thing. Aisha's Saintess identity had been replaced by the previous Haley. Now that she had the Saintess identity, she had greater power. Would she continue to frame him in the future? Did he really only need to be a good dragon desolate guard and survive? He didn't think that this woman would give up. Moreover, he could infer a lot of things from the previous conversation on the ruins of the high-rise building. Although this woman had been deceiving him from beginning to end, some of the things she said might not be lies. After all, a real lie should always be half-true so that people would believe it. One thing could be confirmed from Haley's words. That Aisha, who gave him the handkerchief and took him to the orphanage, really didn't have any friends. Although he was in the cell and couldn't see the whole picture, but he could judge from a person's words and expression. Combined with Haley's previous words, he could basically conclude. This seemed to be useless information, but Dudien understood that it was extremely dangerous. If Aisha didn't have any friends, then he would be used by Hathaway once again due to the relationship between them. Unless she suddenly softened and was satisfied with the Saintess identity and wouldn't deal with Aisha again. However, according to Dudien's previous chat with her, the practices of the bad sister Haley were a great degree of discrediting. This represented a strong hatred. This kind of hatred might not be satisfied by pulling the other party down from the altar. It seems that there will be a lot of trouble in the future. Dudien's eyes turned gloomy. Staying in the Dragon Clan wasn't a long-term solution. He must find a way to leave as soon as possible and produce his own invention. Only then would he have the power to protect himself. However, the production of the invention would take at least 3 to 5 months. Moreover, with his current sensitive identity, would the Dragon Clan let him leave easily? Obviously not. Dudien wrinkled his brows as he thought about all kinds of possibilities. Time flew. Half a day after Aisha left, a voice came from the cell again. Dean was sitting cross-legged in the cell. He was thinking about his own things, but when the cell door opened, he came back to his senses. Although he didn't look up, he saw a figure coming from outside the cell. It was the blonde youth who had gone with Haley to arrest him outside the giant wall. Cyrus looked at Dudien in the dark cell. He ordered the jailer, "Open the door." The jailer had already seen the handwritten order he had brought, so he opened the cage as instructed. Dudien slowly stood up. "Come out, the elder wants to see you." Cyrus frowned as he spoke quickly. He closed his mouth and stopped breathing because the smell in the cell was too disgusting. Dudien's eyes lit up as he nodded and stepped out of the cell. Cyrus turned around and left. Dudien followed him. There was a low-lying valley outside the cell. It was surrounded by thorns and strange flowers. The flowers were brightly colored and were famous poisonous plants in the Flora Atlas. Cyrus didn't say a word as he walked in front of Cyrus. Dean followed closely behind, not squinting, but secretly carefully observing the surroundings. Anyway, walking like this was the same as walking, and at the same time memorizing the route. There will always be some harvest. Although it may not be used in the future, but there is always a chance in life, right? It didn't take long for Dudian to follow Cyrus to reach a high peak. There was a castle here. It covered a large area and looked magnificent. There was a square outside the castle. There were some giant stone sculptures on the square. They seemed to be the ancestors of the dragon clan. Dragon guards wearing standard armor were standing in the corridors outside the castle. Although there was no one around, they were still standing upright and had an imposing appearance. Cyrus led Dudian to the main hall of the castle. There was a bright red carpet spread all the way to the door. It was spacious and tall. It looked like a huge church, but there were no rows of chairs or podium. There was only a bronze throne. A burly man was sitting on it. He was wearing a vest-like armor. His shoulders and arms were dark and full of muscles. On his lower body, he wore loose brown pants that looked like a butcher's and a pair of boots with alloy soles. However, the most eye-catching thing was on his back. There were actually 2 spikes protruding from his back, pressing against the throne behind him. They looked like the spikes on the back of a lizard, one long and one short. The long one was more than 20 centimeters, while the short one was more than 10 centimeters. They looked extremely terrifying. Dudian was shocked as he looked at the man from afar. The man's body was extremely hot like a burning fireball. It was almost comparable to Haley's. However, she was much inferior to Aisha, whom he had seen in the prison cell. The heat on Aisha's body was restrained, like a mass of dark red blood flowing in her body. Although people couldn't distinguish the specific heat density, they could roughly feel some of the intensity. It was several times stronger than this person. But this man's heat was very easy to see. It was completely released as if he was in the most excited state. Is this also a pioneer level? Dudian's eyes flashed. The Dragon Clan was really strong. He just met a random person who had such terrifying strength. Moreover, according to the blonde youth, he was just an elder and not a patriarch. Elder Harlika, this is the outsider who got the Dragon Thorn chapter. Cyrus respectfully said. Harlika raised his dark golden eyes and looked at Dudian. The golden streamers in his eyes seemed to divide Dudian. He said in a rough and hoarse voice, "You go back." Yes. Cyrus respectfully nodded and quickly turned away. He didn't want to stay in front of this monster for a moment. Harlika looked at Dudian after Cyrus left. "You come over." Dudian felt hostility from Harlika. Did Haley's revenge start so soon? Is this elder one of her people? With that in mind, he slowly took a few steps forward. Harlika saw that Dudian was walking very slowly. It seemed that he didn't dare to step forward. He coldly snorted. "Black-haired boy, do you know how badly you have harmed Her Royal Highness Aisha?" Dudian was startled but relieved at the same time. It seemed that this person wasn't one of Haley's people. Harlika snorted as he saw Dudian. Her Royal Highness Aisha has been conscientiously guarding the wasteland for so many years. She almost died several times and became the rations of those monsters. She had sacrificed everything for this family. Her childhood, her life, her freedom, she had sacrificed all of it. But now, because of you, you damnable brat, you've caused her to be replaced by that little girl who only knows how to think. Dudian was stunned. He knew that Aisha's life as a saint was very hard. But now it seemed that she wasn't completely against it. Instead, she was sincerely sacrificing for the family. That's right, if a person is against it, who can force him? Not to mention a strong person like her. He was silent as he thought of this. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.